Destiny in person. This is going to be so much fun, folks. Want to let you know we are very excited. This is a freestyle type of discussion or debate. In other words, it's really up to the speakers. Whatever they would most enjoy discussing, we're going to let them take the conversation wherever they would like to go, completely spontaneously. So, want to let you know though, if it's your first time here, consider hitting that subscribe button as we've got a lot more debates coming up. For example, the famous or infamous flat earther Nathan Thompson will be on this Friday for a good old flat earth debate. But want to let you know, whether you be Republican, Democrat, Christian, atheist, and all the strange creatures in between, we really do hope you feel welcome here. As we are a nonpartisan platform, we have no views, we have no after shows critiquing or claiming one side had victory or loss or anything like that. So, do want to let you know a couple of quick house cleaning things up front. Is months ago, we had discussed with the debaters that both Vosh and Destiny said, hey, that sounds great. 100% of the super chats for this stream will be going to charity. Given that you have obviously heard, coronavirus is running rampant right now, and so what we are planning on doing is giving 100% of the super chats to a charity that is attempting to alleviate the suffering from the coronavirus right now. And so we'll be in touch with that, but do want to let you know, as Vosh and Steve and I talk about that afterwards, if you would like to see the receipt for that donation, just send me an email. That's something I'll send to Vosh and Destiny as well. But even if it's your first time here, feel free. We totally want to have that transparency that allows even a first-time person here to say, hey, can I see that receipt? I'd love to kind of know for sure that it's really going where you promised. We will definitely send it to you. And so with that, as I had mentioned, the format is very open. We're just going to let these guys have a good old conversation. If you have any questions for the Q&A at the end, please fire that question into the live chat. If you have a super chat, that allows you to make a comment toward one of the speakers that they'd of course get a chance to respond to. And then last, do want to let you know, if you do make a super chat or question, we just ask that you'd be your regular friendly self. So thanks so much. And gentlemen, we are thrilled to have you here. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. That should sound pretty good. Hey, nice to meet you. Finally in person. After years.
Yeah.
You look pretty much the same in person.
Thanks. You do too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I hope we both look good in our cams.
Me too.
So coronavirus? Obviously, we talked before the stream because we've both been flying recently. This is all CGI. We're not actually next to each other. That would be violating CDC protocol. We've just been composited in from different sets across the state. But how do you feel, I guess more importantly, about the stock market, like red line go down? You've seen the memes, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a very broad question. How do I feel about the stock market? How do I feel about its impacts on everyday Americans or on?
Well, broadly, because in the lefty sphere, a lot of people are really happy because the 2008 financial crisis sort of precipitated a bunch of really strong anti-establishment sentiment concerning, when the stock markets crash, why does wealth get consolidated with these people and everyone else gets left, out in the street? And a lot of people are excited, I think, for another sort of catalyzing incident. The accelerationist fervor has been kicked back up. And I assume you don't agree with that necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't accelerate us towards much in 2008,
no.
So I don't expect it'll accelerate us towards too much right now. When it comes to lefties, I usually don't talk much about finance or the stock market because usually they're utterly clueless regarding most of it. For instance, the $1.5 trillion repo market thing that was going on with the Fed, most people think that's just stimulus.
The money printing.
So, yeah, I mean, most of it, those conversations are mind-numbingly stupid. I mean, insofar as like the stock market crashing now, I mean, like the ups and downs of the stock market, I don't think affect the average American that much. If you're older, retirement, it can be scary. If you are working and you're looking at your 401k, it can be scary.
I know my parents are scared right now, for example.
Yeah, the scary thing is going to be downstream of that, like if people start laying off workers or people aren't allowed to go into work, which is what's happening. I think that's the scarier thing for most Americans than, whether or not some numbers on the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones are going up and down. So like I just got an email like an hour ago. Apparently like the state of Ohio is like locking down like a lot of employment or whatever. And then around here in LA, we were just talking about getting food and a lot of places are closed.
Yeah,
so, yeah. I don't know how long the country can survive like locking off international travel.
This is unprecedented. I mean, this is like in 2 weeks, like this could end up being one of the most maybe I mean, this could end up being like Depression era, like relative, I think.
Maybe.
Maybe that's a little bit alarmist, but I
The
think we're
problem
at
is,
least
like-
verging close with all the shutdowns, the economy, stock market freezes, biggest drop in the history of the...
Yeah, well, biggest drop absolute numbers. I wish I didn't know we were going to talk about this.
Percentage-wise, I think.
Well,
not just
percentage-wise, so I'm pretty sure in the Great Depression, I want to say 25% of the world's GDP was wiped out, and I want to say that in 2007 it was like 1%. So like in terms of like absolute value, yeah, like billions of dollars are being lost, but like the whole world is far more industrialized, is far more established. The economies have a lot more power to them now than they used to be. You know, more
and the
tenacity.
Dow is not the GDP, of course.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I know a lot of people personally, I'm sure you do as well, who are like terrified right now because a lot of service workers are being laid off. People who work at restaurants, they can't come in. My brother's a chef, you know. He's at home now. Like, what are you going to do? And there are a lot of people. Even Mitt Romney proposed this. The idea of like implementing a temporary UBI.
Yeah, cash infusion. Yeah.
I for the first time, I'm not a huge Yang fan. I actually think that'd be a pretty decent idea here. Do you have any opinions?
I mean,
on
like
that?
the purpose of like that type of stimulus is to kind of like jump. It is basically you see an economic downturn coming, and you want to inject a little bit of cash into businesses or individuals to get the economy not getting quite as low. I don't see a problem with that.
A lot of people like. I mean, some people. Most Americans can't afford like a what was it, $300 emergency or something.
Probably
like
something
that.
like that without going into debt or something. Yeah.
If you can't work, I mean, rent. Like for a lot of people, that's like, oh God, next month. Like I'm dead if I don't come up with something. You know.
Sure. To be
Well, of course, there's a process to being
yeah,
evicted,
of course.
but it's
and
still...
also just for people listening, because a lot of people
You're
have
going
this.
to die.
Yeah, well, a lot of people have this idea that like if you fall behind on your mortgage, like banks want to foreclose. Banks don't want to foreclose on your shit. Landlords don't want to kick you out. Like typically, people just want to collect their rent checks and want to collect their mortgages. If you do fall behind on stuff like, especially right now, you're better off like calling whatever financial institution holds your note, or like your landlord and be like, hey, like I need like to work out something, whatever. Most people will work with you because the actual process of repossessing property or like going through evicting people,
Huge
like this
pain,
is
yeah.
months long of a process depending on which state you live in. Like finding like it's a disaster.
Of course, it all stacks up, though, right? I mean, then you have like the car payments, like daycare, for example.
Yeah, of
or-
course. Yeah, it sucks. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
lot of Oh man, and actually, one of the worst things that a lot of people will miss is schools closing is absolutely catastrophic because if
Because the
you-
kids are,
yeah, for a lot of people,
they're
school
gonna
is like
chew on all the
daycare.
wires, you know?
Yeah, like you don't have to watch your kid for 8 hours, but now you finding somebody to watch your kid is going to be, if even possible, is going to be scary or more financially difficult. And then if you were able to work, but you can't find someone to watch your kid, now you can't work, you got to stay home with your kid. Schools are trying to like go out and deliver lunches because a lot of kids, for instance, only get fed at school, public
Yeah.
lunching like helps them. And I know like a lot of schools are in the process of like trying to like bust out food to some of these children. Like there's a lot of society grinding to a halt.
The mortality rate for children who catch corona is very, very low. We could send them out as little baby carriers, doing the deliveries, picking up supplies from the store. They can fill in the gaps that the older workforce isn't capable of.
Is that what socialism needs?
That's
Child
what's-
labor to
Are
bring it
you?
back?
Hey, listen. There's child labor, and then there's child work. Okay,
Okay,
work.
gotcha.
We're all here. Yeah.
Okay.
Wait, we have to get to that eventually, though, right?
Child labor under socialism? Or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm here to propose.
Okay.
No, the times of crisis usually sort of incite revolutionary fervor, and more so than ever, I think a lot of people are really questioning whether or not the system is capable of handling itself. Obviously, it couldn't handle corona, but more broadly, if it can handle the amount of responsibility that's been placed with. And I feel like you're not that receptive to, if not socialism itself, then socialist ideas that can be implemented to.
I love ideas.
I love ideas too.
I love policies.
Well, I got one for you.
Uh-huh.
I know we talked about it before. I don't know if it's hip and happening anymore, but worker cooperatives. I know I've tried to sell you on these before. Done a lot more research since we last talked. I do hate reading, of course, functionally illiterate, but I did my best.
To be clear, you don't have to sell me on worker co-ops. If worker co-ops work, I love worker co-ops.
Okay, well then that's great, because I know
Sure.
you have a fairly non-ideological approach
Yeah.
towards the implementation of policy, if there is such a thing. You
Sure.
know. But do you not feel, I mean, we're on a precipice of like 8 catastrophes at once right now. Corona's one. I mean, climate change is obviously the worst of them. And I feel like it's at times like these we need to be considering things that are outside the realm of sort of conventional discourse. Nobody right now in this country is seriously talking about like challenging the wealth or the accumulation of power, except for maybe Bernie Sanders, and he's not going to win, it seems. So we kind of have to carry the torch there, and if we can't do it through a presidential election, then we have to find other ways. And I don't know how amicable you are to, because I see you criticize that fervor a lot online. People
Because
like
the
Hal
thing is that,
Kalinske or
like,
Hassan, they're
yeah,
like,
you
know.
can feel passionately about something, but at the end of the day, like, we need an idea. Like, what are you going to do? Like, I hear people talk about all the time they want to close the tax loopholes. Well, what type of tax loopholes do you want to close? If I buy a van for my business, should I not be allowed to write that off? Should I not be able to carry forward losses into the next year like Amazon does? Like, people always have all these great ideas, like, oh, we need to close the tax loopholes. Which ones? Or, oh, we need to make it so that, I don't know, raise like corporate tax rates, or like, it's always just like very vague stuff, and it doesn't really target anything.
But nuance never carries a revolution. I mean, you can specify the details in Congress or whatever, but if you're trying to get people active, you can never say, if you look through, CD page 147, Codex 74, you see specifically this needs to be removed. Nobody gets energized by that. It's these big, passionate, not necessarily illogical, but these driven acts of rhetoric, I think, that really inspire change. And that, I think, and one of the problems I have with you, I think, is you're very policy focused. This is called like policy wonk, I think, derivatively, or sorry.
Sure.
What's the, it starts with a D?
Derision?
Yes, that.
Okay.
With some derision from the left, because these are people who are very, like, obsessed with the intricacies of policy. I think Nate Silver gets this badge placed on him a lot. But a lot of the really, strong positive change that's been made in this country historically hasn't been built on the basis of sort of the calm proposal of specific changes to a complicated set of laws. It's been about very angry people forcing themselves onto the system until the system buckles and eventually has to kowtow. Suffrage, civil rights movement. And if we tell these people, like, hey man, what policies exactly are you looking to remove?
And this is kind of like one of my big criticisms of democracy.
I thought you
I
were
know
going to
you
say
hate
criticism
that.
of socialism,
So, like,
but okay.
my problem is that, like, suffrage and slavery are pretty easy, like, problems and solutions. Women should probably be able to vote. Black people should probably have all the rights afforded to them as white people. When we talk about, like, the financial structure of the United States and, like, what is an appropriate form of taxation, how do we do all these stuff, these are really, really hard questions. I'm all in favor of, like, riling people up and getting them, because I agree, because, like, sitting here and talking about, like, oh, well, we need $4.7 trillion to fund the Medicaid expansion, blah, blah, that's really boring, sure. Yeah. I guess what I'm uncomfortable with when it comes to the left a lot is, like, the demonization of wealthy people. And that's something that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. One, because it's kind of silly. Like, if you were to rob the wealth of every single billionaire in this country, you fund the government for, like, I think a couple weeks. So it's not even like they necessarily have that wealth unilaterally to just, like, carry everything. And then two, this obsession with, like, hating certain groups of people in order to build a movement, like, I'm against that, like, in all areas of my life. You know, whether it's people that play PC games shitting on people that play PS4 games, or whether it's on, like, people that, like a certain sport shitting on other people like a certain sport, or for politics, whether it's like, well, I hate billionaires, all these billionaires need to go, and it's like, okay, well, like, where does that get us at the end of the day? Like, let's talk about the programs we want to fund, let's talk about what we have to do, and then if we have to, like, tax the fuck out of some billionaires to get there, yeah, let's do it, that's great, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I want to address that, but first I want to respond to something you said earlier about the
You think
difference.
it's okay for PC gamers to shit on? Oh, sorry.
A policy I didn't move in on until, by the way, I got my recent computer. Oh boy, let me tell you, an upgrade.
Okay.
Lots of nice games. Doom Eternal coming out. Okay, wasn't paid for that. But with regards to what you said earlier, I think now sort of with the rose-tinted goggles of history, we're actually painting over so many of the complexities that surrounded issues like suffrage or abolition back in those days. Obviously, from a moral perspective, like what we have today, it's a fairly obvious answer, But back then, the question surrounded like, well, what do we do with the former slaves? We still believe they're genetically inferior. We just don't think they should be enslaved. Should there be like legal provisions made to prevent them from being able to? What about miscegenation? Should we be allowing? And there were a lot of, and at the time, very nuanced arguments going back and forth between abolitionists and non-abolitionists. And at the end of the day, it took, gunpowder and iron to end up resolving the difference. Likewise with suffrage, and likewise with the civil rights movement. In hindsight, these feel like, I suppose, fairly obvious moral answers, but I feel like one day, maybe 1,000 years in the future, everything goes right, we can look back in this and think like, maybe a system that politically and economically privileges an incredibly small group of people with a different set of class interests from the rest of the people wasn't the best way to ensure maximum happiness for everyone. And that might be simple to them, and they'll be dealing with ghost and robot sex or something. That'll be their
Yeah,
moral
and I'm not
dilemma.
even saying that like the concentration of wealth in the hands of the few at the expense of the many that's not a good thing. I would hope that nobody agrees with that. Even the people that pretend to agree with that only trick themselves into thinking the lower class is doing better than maybe they actually are. But like when I say that these issues are relatively simple, maybe it feels like I'm painting a little bit too generously the past, saying that like, oh well, like how do you count African slaves as voters, for instance, or yeah, if we think that they're genetically inferior, blah blah blah. But like I guess it's like the difference between something like Jim Crow, like these are policies on the books, written like if you go to a bank, you're black, you don't get a loan. Like it's very, excuse the pun, black and white, right? Very, very, very obvious, right? Whereas like if we were to talk about like systemic or structural racism, I think we can all agree racism equal bad, but like addressing that is like so much more multifaceted than, like looking at actual laws written on the books and getting rid of them. That's all I'm saying, I guess. It reminds me of kind of like
policing, like how judges act, like discriminate sentencing.
Sure.
It's incredible. Well, but it's incredibly. No, I completely agree. Like that's what the Republican types will always say. Find me a racist law in the books. Well, if only it were so easy.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, like, I guess it reminds me a lot of like Brexit, for instance. Like, should the UK leave the European Union? That's a pretty easy yes or no. But what does that actually look like? And people found, well, holy shit, that's actually way more complicated than I thought it was going to be. And there's so much more going on. And Cameron and everybody was like bounced out of there. And they're like, all right, good luck, figure it out. It feels like because things are so globalized today, because things are so interconnected today, I think especially in the United States, something that a lot of younger people, me included, don't realize is politics in the U.S. used to be incredibly localized. Like the political things that you cared about was your union, your parish, and your neighborhood, and like your city. And that was like your political focus. And these days, everything is ultra fucking globalized. You feel very disconnected from everything that's going on. Like your one vote in a bucket of 300 million or whatever. I don't know what the voting population of the U.S. is. Like so much has changed that it feels like there are certain problems that are going to be very, very hard to deal with our current system.
Leaning towards confederation, 50 separate states, duke it out anytime there were border disputes.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm not going to say that like
I
that.
love local politics. Don't get me wrong. Seattle got a pretty vibrant local political scene. They've recently resisted like Amazon's incursion into the city, which, obviously technicalities aside, we're very happy about. And I think that from an alienation level, people tend to be happier when they can directly relate to the effects of policy.
Yeah, you show up at a town hall meeting, you're talking about
There
stuff
you
that's
see
passing
the
like your neighborhood, and there's
person
your
up there.
officials that are writing and voting on the legislation. Feels a lot better than just watching it on CNN or Fox News.
You can
or whatever.
throw a shoe at them. You might get a night in the slammer. If you try to show through the president, it's much harder.
Sure.
And I respect the nuance of many of these discussions. I try because I've an audience now too, and I try to be responsible. I think because I do agree sometimes the revolutionary fervor moves in a direction that I don't think is sustainable. Like for example, you said like hating billionaires and stuff. Now, I'll be candid with my personal beliefs. I do generally believe that most of the extremely wealthy people in this country and most of the higher level politicians are disgusting sociopaths. I do believe that. But I do agree with you in that the formation of political movements on spite is incredibly destructive. This is one of the reasons why there have been so many co-opted left-leaning revolutions over the past century that ended up turning into, kill a third of the population, everyone with glasses, with Pol Pot, for example. Now, that's not exactly an enviable or replicable example, but I do think that turning spite into a political force is dangerous. But at the same time, what do you do if the politics of a system are so entrenched that it is not possible to move within that system through sort of the grounds of civil policy discussion and address it? Certainly not in time. I mean, we were up against the wall with climate change a while ago, and what's been done to challenge the power that coal and oil lobbies have over government? I mean, with Citizens United, it's gotten worse, if anything.
I don't know if my views on this have changed so much over time. I don't know if I buy, when it comes to climate change, I don't know if people are actually really ready to do something about it. Because I don't know if the solution to climate change is legislation in Congress so much as all of us have to collectively come together and start to make sacrifices to do it. And I don't know if the average person is on board with that. This might be something where we split. This is an argument I get into with a lot of people that say well, co-ops would help climate change because the oil workers could blah, blah, blah.
I know that argument.
But I don't know if that's actually true. If there are people that enjoy working, the problem with climate change is twofold. One is that the damaging effects happen over a long period of time, which intrinsically we're not wired to deal with very well. We have to learn how to deal with delayed gratification. That's one. And then two, the effects of climate change aren't localized. So I can drive my car around a polluted I want, but it's not like those fumes are in my house at the end of the night. You know, like more or less the air here, you know, doesn't smell like horribly smoggy and polluted. Maybe somebody from like New Zealand or somebody will contest that. But like, I don't think it like smells like I'm in a garage or whatever. And neither of these two things are, those two huge drawbacks really hamper our ability to do anything about climate change. I don't think socialists could deal with it any better than capitalists could, any better than a green movement could. Like, it's just really hard to get people like really riled up until you literally have like countries, you know, on fire and falling apart.
Right, and even then, I mean, Australia still, the prime minister wasn't willing to, you know, we get forest fires all the time.
Yeah.
Or brush fires, sorry.
Yeah, brush, yeah.
Yeah.
Brush fires.
Yeah. The hell state, by the way, or hell country, Australia, 98 degrees, you know, just year-round, perpetually. I can't imagine living over there right now. My God. That these people contend with their politicians is a miracle to me. I worry, though, that you're naturalizing how slovenly, how disinterested the population is. It's been the argument of people like academics like Noam Chomsky, you know, I know I bring him up a lot, but in his work, you know, Manufacturing Consent, it's this big, like, sort of thesis on the many ways in which the power structures in our society move people's opinions within, like, sort of like herding cattle. Into an acceptable range. And I do feel as though the alienation people experience, or the distance people feel from their voting consequences, I know you've complained about that before, where people just cast a vote and they don't even think, especially with foreign policy or environmental issues. I think that many of these sort of negative components to our democracy are a product of deliberate, or if not deliberate, at the very least manufactured efforts on the part of people who control our society. The news has always been biased. I don't think it's ever been this bad, for example. The extent to which our opinions can be molded, I now with like ads that track everything you look online, and they can specifically move you into certain demographics to maximize how much they can sell to you. It worries me because democracy functions fundamentally in the assumption that people are generally speaking aware of what's going on. Yeah, but capitalism, in some ways, I think, that can be addressed, not all of them, but in some ways, pollutes that flow of information for a profit motive. Sometimes maliciously, like when the oil companies will like lie about this spill or this impact, and sometimes just as a natural consequence of the way information and media moves.
So we can talk for hours about, I guess, like the extent to which media influences people versus people influence media. To bring it back to like an effective political area, one thing that I would like to see, like I'll say the progressive movement in the United States do, so this isn't like the revolutionaries, but like the people that are still pretty far left. The two things that I would like to see is, one, pick like a couple issues and like go hard on that. I feel like having somebody like Bernie Sanders, who wants to do nationwide rent control, Medicare for all, Green New Deal, federal jobs guarantee, like when you're trying to do every single thing, I feel like maybe it would be better, I'm going to say this horrible, horrible word, compromise on like a couple of things, and then just like your stake in the ground is like Medicare for all, that's a deal break. This has to be it. That's it. This is the one thing that we're pushing hard on everything else. You want to keep guns? Okay, fine, whatever. You know, you want to keep Hispanic people from immigrating here? Okay, fine, whatever. But Medicare for all, that's the thing we're going to do, God damn it. That one thing.
I'll give them guns.
Sure. Yeah. Focusing in on like one or two strong political positions and like really driving that, I feel like would be more successful than the overall revolutionary approach. And then two, the fervor and the rabid support for people like Bernie Sanders, I think is awesome. That's great. Bernie, whether Bernie wins or loses, his fan base is absolutely loyal, ride or die, which is good, that's an incredibly positive thing. But like focusing that energy into positivity, or at least directing the negativity away from people that are kind of your allies, I think is the second thing I would like to see. Like if you're a huge Bernie Sanders supporter, that's awesome. And if you take all that fucking hatred you have for Bernie not making it and all the establishment, blah, 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 and you turn it on the Republicans, that's great. But when we start saying things like Pelosi or Pete Buttigieg are fascists, or that Obama was like a neoliberal fascist shill or whatever, it's like, damn, well now like the political effectiveness of your movement is completely evaporated into nothing. Like whatever you wanted to do or achieve is gone because Bernie Sanders was gone. And you know, maybe you shift Biden to the left a little bit on a few things. I don't even know how much is attributed to Bernie there versus just like the general Democratic sentiment.
It's impossible to know.
Yeah. Those would be the two things. So like staking out like one or two big policy points that you want to do, and then like at least directing your vitriol away from people that are your allies. It could be working with you.
I mean, that's the issue, though. You've heard, I assume, lefties say that Democrats are controlled opposition.
Everyone is controlled opposition depending on who you are.
Of course,
Yeah.
how high up the strings go.
Sure.
You know, you've got the Jews, and then you have Kellogg's cereal controlling the real.
I've heard Republicans say even Ben Shapiro, or not Republicans, but like alt-righters will say like Ben Shapiro is controlled opposition, or certain people are controlled.
Yeah,
Richard Spencer is controlled opposition.
Ben and Netanyahu are
there's
together.
like, everyone is controlled opposition if they don't represent everything perfectly. Yeah.
Controlled opposition is a conspiratorial term. I don't generally like using it, but there's a sentiment behind it that I can get behind. And the concern, and this is historically verifiable, is that what we need is serious change. There are people in this country, I think, are suffering past an acceptable extent. There will never be perfect equality or perfect economic justice, but at this time, such an egregious amount of wealth is diverted. I mean, God, you know the Panama Papers, nothing even came of that. But we know the system fundamentally is broken. Healthcare, education failing, politicians not really, the bills that get passed don't tend to represent the popularity of those bills with the average person, but the wealthy people, they get a pretty consistent, positive curve. There are so many problems. And all of the progressives in this country, or the lefties, we get really fired up, we get really revolutionary, and then somebody like Barack Obama comes around and he masquerades as a progressive, and then he gets 8 years, 3 million undocumented immigrants get deported, concentration camps in the south border are built, and we get from this a watered-down Heritage Foundation plan, and admittedly, a good thing, the Iranian deal.
We got the ACA and the Iranian deal. And Supreme Court, at least not the last one, but some Supreme Court
right,
cases
of course, yeah.
I mean, and again, it sucks, but
this goes on forever, this sine wave.
This is the eternal crux, the eternal pain and paradox of the progressive that a progressive just doesn't seem to understand. The problem is that progressives don't understand. If you ask a progressive how they feel about things like where is America at on like Medicare for All or the Green New Deal, what they'll tell you is I'd say 80% of Americans are for it. It's just the corporations and the politicians standing in your way. That's not true. There's a lot of work that has when you talk about Obama got in and he couldn't get anything done, technically, that's a good thing. That's democracy in action. Obama didn't have the Senate, he didn't have Congress for 6 years because he wasn't popular enough. That was the will of the American people speaking. Now, we can talk to some extent, things like gerrymandering, there are different types of voter suppression that happen that are definitely bad, but there is a sizable chunk of American people that just didn't want to see Obama do his thing.
But this is the contention, or the contradiction, I suppose, because you have serious issues with how democracy functions, but then I say we need to make serious change, and you point out, well, hey, democracy says we can't move forward. We have to keep things the way they are.
Well, there are two separate arguments. I'm not a fan of democracy because look at where the fuck we are now. But if you want to make change, I think that you have to do it within the system that exists now. You could go for a revolution, but no one knows what that looks like. And right now, life is decent for most people.
That's very relative. A lot of people feel a severe amount of economic anxiety right now.
Sure.
And I agree. I mean, of course, everything is relativistic. You
Yeah.
know? But at the same time, and it's difficult to make assessments like how much are you maximizing well-being compared to the total potential limit of your society?
Sure, and I'm not even going through some
to
weird
say.
utilitarian calculus, but if you read, I can't even remember any, the English books we read after the Great Depression or whatever, we didn't hit that after 2007. It didn't sink to that level where people are killing themselves over a slice of bread underneath some train tracks.
But that's a low bar to set.
Of course it is. I'm just saying that it's important to recognize that we have made some progress, that things that Obama did were transcendent. The idea that America had any type of healthcare, anything passed, was unbelievable. The ACA sucks compared to what it could have been, but it was a massive leap forward compared to where we were. And the Iranian deal could have sent a new benchmark in terms of American foreign policy, an approach to the Middle East that doesn't involve us fighting with all the Shia people. That would have been amazing. That would have been so cool to see that type of relationship with Iran, a country that, for good reason, has very tepid relations with the United States.
I won't criticize the Iranian deal. I mean, it's funny. The one thing that he did that I am unequivocally, proud of, or happy for, is the thing that didn't interrupt any of the class interests. The people who, the most prominent in this country. Everyone wants peace with Iran, unless you're a fucking idiot, But I'm very pro-democracy. I love democracy. I advocate for democracy in the workplace. I mean, I want it everywhere. Spray paint my house. Democracy. But the issue is, I don't think democracy is really a measurement of what the people want. What the people want is ephemeral and changes depending on the influences they're subjected to.
Sure.
Back in the days of the Civil Rights Movement, most people had a very unfavorable opinion of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Back in the days of abolition, most Americans, Lincoln had to Shanghai American support into into engaging in the war, you know, and it was only sort of because of a legal technicality that they were even able to muster the forces necessary to really bring abolition about. And when we see all of this at those times, all of the good things that happened would have been considered, I think, by people in positions such as yours, very progressive-minded people who are concerned about adhering to sort of the acceptable limits of political movement, to be impossible, or at the very least inadvisable.
Sure. So,
and the past, I just want to conclude, the past century, ever since the Great Depression and the New Deal, has been a slow process of erosion of, not for all, of course, gay rights, great, fantastic, we move forward in some respects, but in a lot of ways, particularly economic, we have made little or negative progress with rights and unions being eroded, regulations being rolled back, tax brackets being flattened, and in some ways, things have arguably gotten worse. I mean, there are people who have made the argument, for example, that post-Jim Crow, the effects of the war on drugs have actually had a proportionally greater negative impact on the black community than
or you look at the 2007, the amount of wealth that was wiped out that largely was restored to a lot of families didn't get restored with a lot of African American families that were,
you know,
sure.
And when you look at this, like, God, you know, we get minor benefits and then they get rolled back, and minor benefits and rolled back, and everything we do in this country, every good thing, eventually gets kicked back by corporate power or the people who represent it. And at some point, you have to think, like, maybe we get rid of the antagonist, you know? Maybe we work a little bit outside the system, gainfully, hopefully, or we incite people to do so in the hopes that this cycle, this perpetual cycle of misery can be overturned and we can actually make real progress. And then we see where the policies lie.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, to be clear, when I'm critical of some people, I'm critical of people thinking that there is a one-way approach to figuring out every problem, but rather, like, I would look at, like, politics isn't like, you know, hammer versus hammer and then who can hit the hardest is the winner. Rather, like, the political landscape has room for all sorts of different types of actors. Like, for instance, you know, you had your Martin Luther Kings and you had your Malcolm X's, you know, and I think that both of these types of figures, like, played probably important roles in actually getting what they wanted done. And I think it's important to recognize that it's really good to have, like, our Bernie Sanderses, our multiple Bernie Sanders, and our
Bernie
like
Sandai.
Yeah, and our Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes, and our Ilhan Omars, and all of these very, very progressive people. That's awesome. And having them there on the side, you know, being activists more than politicians, pushing people in a certain direction, that's fine. But at the end of the day, as much as it pains me to say it, people like the Pelosi's and the Hillary Clintons and the Obamas, these are the people that are pushing through some of that change. Like, these activists on the side, and I say on the side, I don't mean that in a negative way, have a very real goal, which is to, like, shape and shift the American population's opinion regarding certain, I wouldn't even say policies, certain ideas. But at the end of the day, you need a politically effective machine that can start moving those ideas through office. And I think that it's important to recognize that there is value in both of those things. Too quickly, it seems like people are very quick on both sides, really, on the activist side, to say, I hate politicians, you know. If Obama was a man, he would have just executive actioned every fucking possible piece of legislation and abolished Congress and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I mean, like, you have those people. And then you also have the people that are like, you know, hey, Bernie Sanders is a worthless fuck. All of these progressives need to just go away. You guys need to get out of here. I hate all of you, blah, 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 blah. Without recognizing that, well, there's probably a reason why people like even Hillary Clinton supported a 15 an hour minimum wage, nationally speaking, and it probably had a little bit to do with Bernie Sanders and the fervor that his movement started. I think that there can be value found in multiple different types of actors. So whether it's like, as much as I hate him, whether it's like the Kyle Kalinskis or the Hassans online that are drumming up, you know, supporting the base, or whether it's people like Pelosi that are running around Congress whipping votes, I think that all of these people working together to, like, affect change is a better idea than waiting for the revolution.
No, this I agree with. I can absolutely get behind this because, of course, back at the turn of the century, you know, during the Gilded Age, a lot of the labor movements that we saw ended up, you know, we get the 40-hour work week and the weekends and no child labor, and a lot of this was pushed for by people who I suppose would have been me 100 years ago, you know. But the actual changes were hammered out, you know, cross the T's, dot the I's, by politicians and by the people who try to channel that energy into the political space. And I agree there's a need for these two things. I don't think we should have like a revolution every time like a fishing trade deal needs to be renegotiated with Mexico, you know, in the Gulf. I think it's very, very important to recognize that sometimes there have to be capitulations made. The question is, what do you do if they're not coming fast enough? Like, if you think of it as a stopgap, maybe people like me or Hassan are engines that build energy, and we try to get people as excited as possible, and we get them to write letters and pressure people and say mean things on Twitter, which is of course as cathartic as it is effective, and then we look at our elected officials, we check like, hey, how's the pressure working? And just recently, I think within the past 24 hours, Nancy Pelosi shot down sort of backroom deals that were taking place concerning a stimulus bill for like the average worker. Barack Obama didn't push back on the Republicans like anywhere near hard enough. He allowed that Senate seat, or not Senate, sorry, Supreme Court seat to go to a Republican pick because he wasn't willing to fight the fight.
Well, he couldn't do anything.
Well, I have had talks. I have looked at things. It seems like there were legal precedents for doing something if the Senate refuses to do its job. But we get an 8-year progressive presidency change, and we get two policies from it. One of which is now woefully inadequate. I think most people agree the ACA was a compromise, even in the best of days.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and the Iranian deal has been overturned, but that's not Barack Obama's fault.
Or maybe it is DACA. The thing is that Obama, it's funny because people are always like, we need a stronger president to just get out and do these things. And to some extent, Obama did. That's where we got DACA from. Congress couldn't move on it. Well, now I'm going to do it via executive action.
Yeah,
but now we see the problem with stuff like that is, well, as soon as the next guy comes in, now it's gone by executive action.
Right, but exactly. All the changes are temporal. That's why I always told the people who listen to me, Bernie Sanders gets in office. Do you think that fixes anything? The fight, I mean, that's where the real frustration.
Fight is beginning there.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you think it was fun, like listening to him, the epically own people on Twitter, God, imagine him like arguing to get like bills passed through McConnell. It's nightmarish, We'll
and the Democrats wouldn't even have the Senate, so that would be a monumental. I mean, there are ways to do it, but the political pressure required for that, because it's like you're always fighting, like sword and shield, like you're fighting battles, on your more extreme ends to get legislation passed, but you also have to protect your moderate districts. That was the blue wave. Yeah, was getting all of those moderates out to vote and flip those districts blue.
And this is interminable. There's no way through this, not through the system as it exists now.
A fight,
but there is an outside pressure that is affecting all of this, and it disproportionately negatively affects us. The pressure of capital. And that is to say, more broadly, if I may, that if we look generally speaking, who passes legislation that favors business interests, Trump with his tax cuts, who maneuvers the political discourse in this country in such a way as to be favorable to those who already have power, this is obviously more of a Republican thing. But even the Democrats kowtow to a lot of these policies. And this is an outside pressure that makes it very difficult, even for us to work within the civil means of democratic legislator. I dream of a world where I can have arguments with policy wonks over the nuances of some stimulus bill or whatever, but I'm doing so in a world where there's not an incredibly powerful collective entity weighing their thumb on the scale more heavily than the collective voter population.
Yeah, this is, I guess, this brings us back to a fundamental disagreement. I think that your economic system is a vehicle for whatever your particular population believes. I think that a socialist system could be just as racist and corrupt as a capitalist system. I mean, like if we go back and we look at this country in the in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, but through the Jim Crow era, there were times where the only reason black people could even get into certain neighborhoods is because a real estate broker saw an opportunity to like break a block, to do like blockbusting, where they would go in and they would find a white family and offer them twice as much money for their house to get them to move out, because otherwise white people wouldn't sell to black people ever. This was like the only way that black people could actually start to get some forms of real estate. And you look at some of the ways that unions worked in the Jim Crow era, even when federally we start to legislate like, hey guys, no more discrimination, a lot of these unions fought tooth and nail to hold on to the structures that they had set up. I know I'm more familiar with Boston than anything else, or not Boston, I'm sorry, Baltimore than anything else, but in Baltimore, a lot of these unions had like all of these seniority systems where even when federally we got rid of a lot of the types of discrimination that existed, because of the way the seniority system was set up, there was no way that black people were ever going to get into any of these other jobs because white people held them for longer. And as soon as black people started to protest to get into, a lot of these people in the unions just went on strike. And I mean, I see, and these were like strong unions at the time, like United Auto Workers, like Steel Workers. These were really powerful unions. The idea that just like collectivizing and hoping that fixes racism or any of these structural or systemic problems. I mean, I've seen it happen in, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say, I'm not a...
Or wait, real quick. I've seen it happen in these more socialized systems. I just don't believe it's going to magically disappear if you change your system of economics.
Yeah, okay, I'm not a class reductionist. I don't believe that socialism can fix all of our social woes. Racism, for example. There are a lot of people who claimed, for example, that the Soviet Union like abolished racism or whatever, when in fact, though they were better in black-white relations than the United States was, that's because they didn't have a black-white issue in
They
the
had
USSR.
like 7 black
They had their
people.
own, right? They had their own. They had their own racial groups
Yes.
that they were also. Yeah,
But
yeah.
we just call them all white people, but
To them, it was very
of
serious
course.
to them.
Mhm,
Yeah. So I'm not under the impression that, though I guess the USSR did make advances with women that were pretty serious, but whatever. The point that I'm making, though, is that I don't believe that ultimately all economic systems are an equal representation of the will of the people, so to speak. I mean, we know, for example, that when it comes to maximizing, utility and human happiness, feudalism is an infinitely worse system than like a capitalist democracy, like a liberal, the systems we have today. Because back then they had no means through which to express their will, and it was just the powerful keeping their boot on them, and blah blah. And obviously things are better today, but one of the reasons that things were able to get better was because with the advent of public education and a shift in the public discourse, people began to think of themselves in different ways, such as to build a civil society. Back in the days of feudalism, I'm sure every serf hated their lord to some extent, or maybe not, but I imagine it was pretty widespread. But in terms of the collective language and understanding, human egalitarianism, representative democracy, this language didn't exist to them. They literally were philosophically not relevant at the time. And today, I think, we see a similar problem where we have the outcomes of alienation and of the distancing between the process of electing a representative and how that process is actually delegated and who is sort of supporting campaigns behind the scenes, that it's difficult for people to genuinely actually act in their class interest. This is what, what's it called? I'm sure you know the term as well as I do. Class something. Class, I'm pushing for it. Class consciousness.
Oh, okay.
Right, that's what class consciousness is all about. It's the belief that through the system as it exists, people's actual, not will, because that's the will of the people is a fascist sort of sentiment, but the interests of the people are being suppressed. I don't believe every problem can be fixed. I do believe, through socialism, I do believe many problems stem through an unhealthy relationship between the capital owners and the politicians in this country, and that there is no way to split them up without severe action being taken. They're behind many bad things that have taken place. We don't need to get into specifics, I suppose, over the past century, both domestically and foreign. And I don't know, we're never gonna legislate these people out. We're ticking down when it comes to certain catastrophes. I don't know if we can wait around until, Miami is up ankle deep, oh, hey, maybe we should stop letting oil companies, roll hundreds of millions of positive coverage for the candidates who will pass bills in their favor. I don't think we have that kind of time. I think the urgency is needed. And if the people who are pushing through the bills, Pelosi, Obama, whatever, Pete Buttigieg, are stopgapping too hard, if they're not letting change happen at an acceptable pace, I think it's the obligation of people like me to say, we have to circumvent. We have to move around this wall.
I guess I just don't know if I believe.
Sorry, that was a lot. I apologize.
Sure, yeah. I don't know if I believe that the interests of billionaires is so fundamentally different than the interests of working class people. When it comes to things like tax policy, sure, but when it comes to things like global warming, I don't think a lot of billionaires are legitimately thinking well, if half the planet floods, I'll probably just go move somewhere and be chill. I'm pretty sure most people are opposed to these types of if we focus specifically on climate change, even ExxonMobil, I think for the past decade, has had a neutral stance on climate change where they got rid of their, it probably doesn't happen. The problem is that people have vested interests in the areas that they're a part of, and they'll represent those interests. So if you have a lot of money that's tied up in fossil fuels, you're more likely to represent fossil fuels. But that's as true for the business owner, it seems, almost as much as the workers themselves. How many, just here in LA, for people that live here, I think we're ready to flip the switch on the cheapest solar farm in the world. And we can't do it because the fossil fuel unions here are protesting because they don't want to lose their jobs. I'm just not sure if I totally buy into this idea that flipping the switch to another economic system would even start to address any of these problems. We talk about alienization from labor and whatnot, or alienation from society in general. A lot of this can go back to the impacts of technology or industrialization on people. The idea that we drive 20 minutes to go to a job rather than having things more locally set up. You could plan cities in entirely different ways, but we don't because we travel so far to work. The impacts of the internet social media and everything on children going through school has had, I'm pretty sure it's like universally seen as a horrendous negative that kids are on Facebook and everything. The lack of localization in politics, the fact that nobody cares anymore and they just watch the national news and they're not invested in their own local scene. I don't know how many of these things necessarily just go away because we change like the particular type of economic organization we have. Maybe it can start to address some things, but I think that you have more or less all the same problems and you still have to find other tools to deal with it. You know, when we spoke about like lobbying last time, for instance, should lobbying be made illegal? Well, nobody thinks lobbying should be illegal. Every company should have a chance to make its case to a legislative body or to the public. But you know, I wouldn't expect a coalition of workers that represents, you know, fossil fuels to be any more honest about their jobs than a capital owner for fossil fuels. Just because that's where their interests lie. Like, I think you need another tool. Like in both socialism or capitalism, you would need some sort of like third-party body that arbitrates these types of things, that looks at the situation and then determines, you know, what's better for public interest.
So before I address that, because I absolutely do believe that a change in the means of production would lead to a change in how the relationship between the worker and the business, not broadly speaking, you know, the power structures. I do want to say then, if your contention isn't specifically with the means of production then, and more broadly with the way in which these powers are abused, do you have any solution to the rampant abuses of power and general harm that's being caused by essentially by corporations that politicians have a financial interest not to address? Even if we leave aside socialism, there's no denying from the opioid crisis, which is killing tens of thousands and putting hundreds of thousands in hospital beds because they just lied about how addictive their products is. It's sort of a dark mirror of the tobacco industry, you know, 50 years ago, to auto industries lobbying to prevent cities from implementing public transport, to just everything that happens here. Almost every bad thing in this country has some sort of financial interest pressing on it. What do you suggest be done about that? Especially, we're running out of time.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny that you bring up, because like taxi drivers that are unionized also like champion against Uber and Lyft and whatnot coming in as well. So I mean, like both sides do it. Like it just depends on like what this particular issue looks like. In terms of what can be done, I firmly believe, as much as some people hate me saying it, we, at a surface level at the very least, we definitely live in a democracy. If we wanted to tomorrow, we could vote out every single congressperson. Nothing can stop you. There's gerrymandering, whatever. If we really wanted to do it, we could do it. So we have to ask a little bit of a deeper question. Well, why do people vote, you know, as you would say, against their class consciousness or against their class interests? Like, why are they not able to vote in line with that? I think that the two major issues, these are one and the same that I have a problem with, is one is media, and then two is like technology united with media. So for the first thing, for media, I don't think it's good that like our mainstream media stations are relatively partisan. I don't know if it's good that like if you're a left person, you can turn on CNN. If you're a right person, you turn on Fox News. That type of divide just increases partisanship and probably drives people away from figuring out what's actually happening, because you're more likely to listen to your version of the alternative facts. I think that's a huge problem. And then a second huge problem is with the advent of alternative media, the unionization of the profit motive with technology has created something wholly evil on the internet. You talked about it earlier, the idea that I can hone in, I can craft this perfect profile of you to figure out what types of videos you want to watch, and I can send you down the deepest, darkest rabbit hole I can so that you're watching fucking 50 million videos. And
I hope you like Alex Jones.
Yeah. If I watch, click the Destiny video where he mentions Ben Shapiro, well, here's Joe Rogan, here's Jordan Peterson, here's Alex Jones, here's Ben Shapiro, like every, you know, right-leaning and then alt-right-leaning eventually person. Yeah, I think that those two things are huge problems that need to be addressed. I think that there has to be some form of government intervention when it comes to informing the public of what's going on. I don't think that what we have right now works. Whatever I would suggest as an alternative to it would be something that would make me uncomfortable, because it would require a dramatic intervention of government into that industry, which leaves itself susceptible to all the problems of government, for instance, Donald Trump being president. But I would be willing to take that over what exists now, which I think is leading us down a pathway to destruction.
I certainly agree that these are serious problems that need to be addressed. I just wonder if we're pulling back the focus a little bit too far when it comes to, for example, the way media influences people, you know, partisanship and what have you. I like partisanship. Personally, as a more radical-leaning person, I love the fact that people these days are so radically divided that we don't even see the same world. And the reason for that is because I think that the lines are being drawn a little bit more clearly. Now that things are more partisan, it's more easy to see who or what the beliefs of people who are just cucks to the establishment really are. If you take your average Trump supporter, for example, and pardon me for being partisan, you know, but these people are insane. in my personal humble opinion. And much of that insanity comes from them replicating rhetoric that has been digested and fed to them by, like you said, Fox News, for example. Fox News just obliterates people, you know, from the jaw up. If you watch it too much, it's boomer side, really. And when we look at people who have been subjected to that degree of sort of media, I guess synthesis, yeah, brainwash, whatever term you want. It's very loaded, but we're all subject to brainwashing. You know, anyone who watches me will have a certain opinion. You a certain, like, that's just how we work. Of my community spawned from yours. God knows there's been influences with regard to that. That's just how human beings get their information and try to parse it. But if you look at the kinds of things people who succumb to that process believe, to varying extents, these, I think, extend beyond the reach of partisan media. I think this extends well, well, well beyond that point. I think it extends to a point now where, I mean, I think the easiest example of this is the fact that even comparatively left-leaning news channels like MSNBC and CNN have in some, I suppose this is maybe contentious to you, but I would say that their reporters have demonstrated in some instances a clear bias against Bernie Sanders and some of his ideas. I'm not claiming that makes the election results illegitimate, but it means that even within the purview of left-leaning, you know,
you really think comparing
media,
Bernie Sanders to a Nazi invasion is evidence of bias in some people?
Listen, hey, all I'm saying is we're keeping Central Park fired up, okay, in case he decides to come out of retirement. Sure. In Minecraft. But it's difficult because even in these spaces, there's no room for this discourse. The Overton window is kept relatively contained when it comes to certain economic issues. On social issues, you know, on Fox News, you can call like Mexican subhuman, get a deal for it. And on MSNBC, you can talk about how body language indicates that Bernie Sanders has harbored misogynistic thoughts towards Elizabeth Warren. But when it comes to economic discourse, very narrow range, very, very narrow. Taxes, maybe a bit higher or maybe a bit lower, you know, or maybe a lot lower, you know. When it comes to dealing with like welfare or social programs, maybe we can slightly increase the range of people affected by this, or maybe we can defund all of it. Maybe we can just kill everyone, who knows. Broad range of discourse maybe on the far right side when it comes to that kind of stuff because it's in their interest. I don't see that being broken by anything other than substantive change. I know I keep saying this rather urgently, like time we're like running out, and I say that, I think, because these are problems that have been addressed before. While we don't have socialism in this country, you know, there have been socialists in it for a long time, and the way in which the propagation of business interest influences people's opinions and makes them act out of their class interest is a subject that's been studied, addressed, confronted, and overcome in battles in the past. You mentioned unions, and it's true, unions act in their own interest and nobody else's. Back in your days, you know, one of the most effective tactics to make unions ineffective around the turn of the century was to propagate racist propaganda, which sometimes corporations would do in tandem with city leaders, because the unions wouldn't take black folk, and if there are black workers at a given business, they're not part of the union, they're not going to strike along with them, meaning you get free scab workers. And all of this was deliberately orchestrated, the dissemination of ideas antithetical to their class interest, concentrated at a very uppermost bracket of capital. And it was addressed, and we dealt with it, kind of. And it feels like now we have no choice, like this is it. This is the problem we've been facing for the entire duration of this country. People make money off of human suffering. It's just sometimes the profit motive is good, sometimes it's bad, and we have to address this. But we can't do it as long as we're speaking within the very narrow range of economic discourse in mainstream media.
I mean, I think every country probably deals with a relatively narrow range. Like, I don't think that you go to even a European country, they're like, well, should we all be libertarians or should we all be communists? Like, everybody has like their own particular range. Like, now in Europe, the economic policy is obviously considerably to the left, at least in Scandinavian countries compared to the United States. But I mean, I think it's reasonable that, like, because of the way that our government is structured, you can't pass radical change. It just doesn't happen, right? The structure of the government doesn't allow for that to happen. Going back to one of the first things you brought up, something that I actually fundamentally disagree with, I don't actually think there's that much difference between, like, if anything, between like a Trump supporter and a Bernie Sanders supporter. I think that on a fundamental level, I think that most people are about the same. I think that people in general want to hang out and spend time with their family. They want to feel like they have the tools available to them with dignity, like take care of their lives. I think that most people feel like they want to be able to work a decent job, work hard, but make enough money so that they can have a house, send their kids to school, and do okay. And then they want to have like fun on the weekends. I think that's like 99%. They want to be healthy, they want to be happy, they want to be able to have fun, they want to drive a car, watch movies. I think this is it like explains like most people, like 99%. The fundamental drives between most people is the same. Now, how that ends up playing out, I mean, depends on the intersection of so many different things. It could be your faith, your religion, your geographical area, the history that you might have with certain politicians based on where you're at. I mean, where your political interests ultimately align is a very complicated question. But I do disagree with that idea that fundamentally a Trump voter is like a different type of person than like a Bernie Sanders supporter. And if anything, I think it's kind of ironic is that some of this bend towards this I was going to say alternative right, not like alt-right, but like whatever you would call Trump, because he's not really a neocon. He's not a neoconservative.
Like a populist.
Yeah,
right.
This populist bend has shown us that actually kind of is some similarity between people on the right and people on the left. This is something that I see a lot of left-leaning people make a mistake. When you have a debate with Charlie Kirk and you attack him and you're like, you just want to make it so it's easy for corporations to run America. A lot of these newer conservatives are like, no, fuck corporations. I don't want them to be able to run America. We should tax the fuck out of them. A lot of these people on the right, or Trump, who is like, you know what? I want to tariff people. I want more protectionism. I want to protect American businesses. These are things that are very anti-establishment Republican, very anti-big business. A lot of businesses are hurt by those tariffs. A lot of businesses are hurt by stricter immigration. And I think represent kind of maybe, I don't want to say like a wake-up call, but maybe this idea like, well, hold on. Maybe there is some similarity between what people are reaching for. You know, people on the left are quick to point out, well, billionaires are the reason for all of my problems because they're holding all the money. People on the right are quick to point out, well, you know, brown people coming in and taking my job so that I can't work a decent job and take care of my family. These guys are ruining my life. I think at the end of the day, most people want the same thing. They just get there in very, very different ways, which is where my criticism of the media comes in. And the hyper-partisanship creates these partisan divides where there aren't any. Like, everybody in America agrees on healthcare. Everybody in the United States thinks that everybody else should be happy and healthy. We just dramatically disagree on how to get there. Republicans think that any individual has the ability to afford it if they really try. People on the left think, well, no, a lot of people don't have access to it. But the fundamental drive for everybody to have health care, I think most people agree with that, save for some very sociopathic people. But it's the hyper-partisanship of the media that sold you like different sports teams is driving this artificial wedge between people, making them think they disagree on fundamental issues when I don't really think they do.
I completely agree. I believe the media is unnecessarily driving a wedge on people who fundamentally would agree on the same issues. I just don't think there's a way to remove that wedge or that pressure without addressing the fact that media is ultimately beholden to corporate interest. Like, I think what you said actually speaks almost to my point. You talk about how Bernie Sanders supporters and Trump supporters want basically the same things, and we could, I suppose if we wanted to get anarcho-syndicalist on it, we could talk about how if you asked a person back in 1880 what they would have wanted, they would have said, after my 12-hour shift 6 days a week, I just want to spend time with my kids. Our expectation for what a good life is always going to be subject to the
relativistic
system.
force of the time. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, of course. We're not exactly at a post-scarcity world yet, so I'll keep the champagne bottles in the cellar. But the point I want to get at is I agree. Fundamentally, people want the same thing. It's just the degree to which you've achieved class consciousness, I would argue. It's a highly ideologically loaded term, but when you take a look at, for example, and I know you disagree with Bernie on some policies, for example, rent control, I know I disagree with him on that. There are a few other things, not off the top of my head right now. But broadly speaking, I'm sure you could agree with me that when it comes to trying to propose solutions to generally increase the quality of life for most people, Bernie Sanders supporters are quite a bit more in the mark than Trump supporters. I mean, Trump supporters are.
But that's.
You don't think so?
It's not the case. It seems
Wait,
like
really?
that.
You don't think so? When it comes
to
the practical consequences of who they support, not just what they say they would want.
So I genuinely believe that Trump supporters would look at a Medicare for All plan and say that it's evil. What they say would happen is the government would, if you buy into their reality, they say the government's going to come in and it's going to tell your 64-year-old grandma she doesn't need that medication anymore because now we've got to ration it out, like all the long lines in Sweden and Canada and the United Kingdom tell us, she's not going to get health care anymore. You want your grandma being killed by the government because they've decided that she's not entitled to health care. You see how horrible the VA is ran. You want everybody lining up on the street. They can't go to the hospital. Well, you want to destroy the United States' place in the world as having some of the best health care where people fly in. Like, I genuinely believe that they think that that type of government intervention would be like a really negative thing. And if you look at historically American politics, both on the left and right, in the past, Americans were much more driven towards this idea that government exists, it's an American idea, government exists to give us the tools to take care of ourselves. That's all it's for. We don't need the government to take care of us. That's what our churches are for. That's what our unions are for. That's what our local communities are for. We don't need the government to step in and do this. And I think that there's like that undercurrent still exists, especially in rural America today, where they don't live in the massive city with the billions of dollars of skyscrapers and all the business. They have their small community, and they just want the government to give them the tools to take care of themselves. Now, obviously, to be clear, on an empirical level, that's beyond fucking stupid. Any proposal of healthcare made by Republicans is insanely laughable, borderline fucking insane. But I do think that the individual supporters themselves genuinely do believe that they're pushing in the right direction.
But that's the thing, though. I completely agree. And through the guise of corporate media, they are moving in the opposite direction to where they need to go. I do believe. I'm not one of those people who believes that all Trump supporters are bad people. I think that's a very moralistic way of looking at how people develop their political
Earlier, it kind of sounded like you said that. So
I think they do. I think they do bad things.
Sure. Okay.
And I suppose that would make them bad in a purely utilitarian sense. But at a core, I do genuinely believe most people want things to be good for everyone.
Want their shit to be taken care of. Yeah.
Now, if you look maybe at their views on, say, for example, immigrants or trans people, then I think maybe we get some actual bad tendencies. But when we're talking strictly on economics, I'm much more concerned with what it takes to incentivize people to make decisions that are in their best interest. Because right now we're just not cutting it. Half the country doesn't even think climate change is real. They went along with Trump thinking that coronavirus was a Democratic hoax until he had to declare it a national emergency. And basically everything the Republicans have done at national government levels has been downright sociopathic for the past 20 years. Sure. Ever since, before Bush too, but I think it's gotten worse maybe? I don't know, I'm only so young,
Partisanship has gotten worse for sure.
Definitely, yeah, and the degree to which I suppose they feel comfortable doing things that are clearly against the common interest of Americans. The Republican Party, what they passed through, Mitch McConnell leaving hundreds of congressional bills just sitting on his desk. This is inexcusable behavior, but they'll defend it till their dying days because it's part of this broader populist movement, owning the libs. But I think that is manufactured, and what's more, I feel as though it's our responsibility as people who I would like to believe we have better ideas than most Republicans when it comes to how to make the country a better place. I think it's our responsibility to take on the systems that are keeping our democracy from genuinely representing what the will of the people, again, I hate that term, it's so inherently fascistic, but what the interests of the people should be. And when I say should be, I don't mean in broad ideological sense. I just mean if you want health care, if you want VA benefits, this is a generally good direction. This is lunacy.
Yeah, so I guess where do you go then from here? Because my problem is that, and I'm not saying you do this because I know you don't, because I wouldn't be talking to you if you did. But a lot of left-leaning people are, I'm talking broadly, the Bernie or bust mentality. It seems like that this revolutionary ideology is generally most easily held if you're in a pretty comfortable position. If you're a guy that's going to school, mom and dad are pretty wealthy, it's pretty easy to hold up your BB gun in the background. It's the revolution is coming. But when it comes to actual people that are working right now, or maybe disaffected groups like gay people or women that might lose the ability to have an abortion in the United States.
That's coming up.
That this idea that we just throw everything out until a revolution happens is deeply troubling to me. It misses all of the problems that actual working class people have, and it just kind of brushes them off to the side for this sexy fantasy of the massive revolution rising up that who knows how many years away we could be from that.
But are you criticizing their ends, or are you criticizing their efficaciousness?
I think that I think the thing I'm most critical of is the political effectiveness. Okay. I just don't think it's effective to take a minority of the population, because progressives are, and to try to hold the whole left side hostage in the hopes that more people will come over to your side, and then until then you just say, well, screw all working class people, let them suffer in the meantime, they're going to all be martyrs for our cause. It's kind of the broader problem that I have.
I'm not a Bernie or buster. Allow me to defend Bernie or bust, if I may.
Sure.
I think that accelerationism gets a lot of bad rap sometimes. Accelerationism, I know you know what it is, but just the idea of upping the stakes until you reach a point where things are favorable to you, essentially. And I think that we implement these processes in our electoral system all the time. The bidding that goes, not bidding, sorry, the debate that goes on in Congress, you know, when you add bills to other bills, like, oh, will you not vote for it now that it has your favorite daycare's funding, you know, put in. The process of accelerationism, I think, is sound. It's unintelligent application, I think, sometimes that bugs me. With Bernie or bust specifically, the reason I'm not, and the only reason I'm not, is because I don't believe the DNC actually cares about winning the presidential election. I think that ultimately the DNC is beholden to its corporate interests the same way Republicans are, and much in the same way that many agents within the DNC don't like Bernie Sanders that much, not to speak of rigging or anything, they just don't seem to like him that much. I don't think they would ever allow, I do believe, perhaps maybe a little cynically of me, that they would rather lose to Trump than win with Bernie. If it weren't for that, though, I do wonder, because the thing that gets the Bernie or bust folk out of bed every morning, you know, is the thought, like,
What?
which is less ethical, to perpetuate a miserable system into perpetuity until we all drown, or to kick the cogs until we can get the thing working again.
If this was true, if this DNC was such an evil establishment, I think political organizations exist to secure power for themselves. I think that's generally what political organizations do. This idea that the DNC would say, well, if our guy didn't make it, we don't want it. We don't care if Bernie wins the election or not. We're just going to cede it to Trump, and we'll get our own guy in next election cycle. If this was true, one of the most powerful political machines that have existed in all time is the Clinton dynasty. Obama was a relatively unknown senator when he came up through that election cycle, and everybody threw their weight behind him once he destroyed Hillary. And I don't know how many people remember, you know, people, maybe I'm misremembering, it's been a long time, but like that election cycle, that primary was absolutely vicious.
I wasn't politically engaged at the time.
It was unbelievable. And I remember thinking at the time, like, wow, I don't think the Democrats are going to be able to come together after this, because holy Jesus, like Hillary, it was pretty clear that Hillary was going to be the nominee, and after 8 years, it was pretty clear we were going to have a Democratic president, and that was like Hillary's for the taking. And then Obama came up relatively out of nowhere and just whoosh, destroyed her.
Dabbed on her, yeah.
But DNC threw their weight behind Obama. We went through the election cycle. It's not like they were like, oh, well, we're not going to do anything. You know, Hillary campaigned for him and everything. And it seemed like politics continued.
Yeah. Obama didn't really challenge the class interest of the DNC, though.
I mean, Obama was relatively progressive at the time.
But economically, I mean, Bernie Sanders is, I think you could agree, something that bothers me when the left, they'll be like, oh, Bernie Sanders would be a moderate in Europe. Oh, he fucking wouldn't.
No, he wouldn't.
Bernie Sanders is very
Would be
clearly a
extreme left,
socialist,
yeah.
barely clinging on to the veneer of social democracy, and I love him for it. That's like, hey, great, you know, fuck Europe. Get him out of here. We already have. He is, I think, substantively more of a threat to the entrenched class interests of the bourgeois than Obama could. And I just want to be clear.
so.
I just want to be clear, though. I'm not saying like there's a secret corporate meeting at the DNC where they're like,
No,
all
and
right,
I
we're not
understand. When
letting
you
anybody
talk
through.
about,
Just a
we could just be
broad-
talking about like a broad consensus. That
Yeah,
this
yeah.
guy kinda
Individual
sucks. Sure, I
actors have
understand.
slight biases
But
that lean them one way.
I don't
towards
even
the
think
other.
that's
Chris
true.
Matthews said he would like, well, do we really want Bernie over Trump? I mean, he said it, you know.
Sure, that Matthews was the guy that quit recently, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That made
the sexual
German-
harassment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that guy very clearly fucking hates Bernie.
No, of course, that guy, clearly that guy's an outlier, but I'm sure that
But,
sentiment
like,
exists
one
to
of the
some
things-
extent with a lot of these people.
So, one of the things that I hope a lot of people looked at was, so I feel like I actually ordered manufacturing consent, and I will read it as soon as I get it.
It's really good.
I'm
It's
sure
one
it
of
is.
my- yeah.
But I've read a lot of stuff in the meantime that manufacturing consent presents like a pretty one-sided view of like corporations manufacture kind of the ideas that people take on, and then that's basically they kind of like drive public opinion. But I've seen like a lot that says that like it's actually more like a two-way thing, that like public opinion manufactures the private sector, but it's very much like a give and take between the two. When Bernie Sanders became the front runner, the tune on a lot of mainstream media like was very surprising. When he did that town hall after he became the front runner, those were some of the easiest softball questions I've ever seen in my life. The hosts were pretty nice to him. A lot of people on the major news stations, on CNN and MSNBC, Anderson Cooper and a few other guys, like had pretty nice things to say. Like they were pretty warm towards him. It wasn't the same combative tone, like the horribly one when he was like such an underdog, which kind of makes me wonder. Well, you know. and I know you're not saying there's a grand conspiracy, but like, is it so much that all these people at CNN and MSNBC are so scared of their class interests being threatened and they don't want taxes to go up, blah, 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 blah? Or is it more just like the media knows who the public's favorite candidate is, and they're more likely to be a lot softer on that guy because they want to keep their ratings up versus Bernie Sanders, who's an outsider? And then as soon as Bernie Sanders is like the front runner, they kind of like warm up to him like quite a bit. He wasn't able to like convert that into like a real political lead, but they were like pretty warm towards him in that brief period. I do think that it's more likely that people in the media are more likely to just be friendly towards a candidate that is seen as more popular because they want to protect their ratings rather than any type of actual class interest, corporate donor stuff going on like that, I think.
The problem with by the way, anyone who criticizes manufacturing consent is a class traitor. It's okay. You don't have to listen to me.
Okay.
But the problem with discussing stuff like this is that it's very difficult to force one lens of analysis on why the media or an industry behaves the way it does.
For sure.
Invariably, class interest is a huge part of it, but also, like you said, favorability and ratings are how the media exists. Even if business A wants this, it's not as though, for example, like the news anchors are going to go up there on MSNBC and talk about how like the opioid crisis is fake because they just got a donation from a pharmaceutical.
Sure.
There's obviously some variance there, but as we agree, you agree, the point ultimately of an institution is to preserve itself. That is always few
whether it's a
exceptions,
union
number
or government
one.
or a business or a capital.
And a business functions the same way. And we know businesses have influence over policy, over media, over public education, over what bills get passed and which don't, over who gets airtime, over who gets taken seriously and who doesn't, and who gets to buy all the means necessary to promote oneself. I can't make any strong, definitive claims like the DNC would never allow Bernie Sanders to win over Trump, because I think that would ignore the multivariate analysis of how these decisions come to be. More that I do believe there are genuine biases there that can't be addressed from within the corporate media, and we will never know the extent to which that bias exists, only that it does. And sometimes I think lefties go too far attributing that bias, where sometimes people will be like,
I've heard people say literally Jeff Bezos tells like WAPO journalists what to write.
Single-handedly, he personally.
It's like calling down the journalists, like don't publish that article or whatever, right?
But is it perhaps a coincidence that WAPO is pretty actively anti-Bernie, I think, after getting bought up by, Jeff Bezos? I don't think so. I don't know the extent of the bias, and I never will know. All I can know is that I think whatever bias there is a toxic influence. The question I have for you then is, I think when it comes to what we believe is wrong with this country, we would agree on almost everything. We're both socially progressive, so when it comes to like trans or gay,
I don't think I would
black.
say almost everything. I think America's done a lot of cool stuff, even on the world stage compared to other countries, I think.
You mean, what do you think we would disagree on in terms of like ideal world?
I mean, we definitely have a lot of work to do, but I think we're better off than we were like 20, 30, or 40 years ago.
Well, I agree with that,
Sure,
with
okay.
with a possible exception of some things. For example, I think women's right to an abortion was probably more secure 20 years ago than it is today.
That's probably true.
Yeah. But when it comes to like, do we want people to have health care? Do we want people to not experience economic alienation? Do we want people to be happy, make friends, for example? I never even get to talk about this with you, like the social elements of capitalism, the anomie from the means of production that lead to everyone feeling so disaffected and lonely, which is an increasing problem these days. But it's very complicated. I know.
Yeah,
it's difficult.
my problem is that like people always point towards capitalism as
Technology
doing
is
like, capital,
also a huge.
Industrialization is a massive thing. Like the USSR hunted some species of whales almost out of existence. The USSR drained the Aral Sea, which was like the fourth largest body of water in the world.
Well, I don't claim the USSR.
Sure, I understand.
They were state
but I'm saying that these were
capitalists.
people that were not driven necessarily by profit motive, but by government mandate. And like it's so funny. Like people today are saying, well, now more than ever, we see that we needed Medicare for all based on the coronavirus. Like really, a lot of the big problems we had with the testing had to do with Trump himself making decisions about, was it the CDC team or what was
he got rid of the pandemic team in 2018.
Yeah,
the CDC had
that
the funding
Obama
cut.
had instituted, I think, after the Ebola thing.
I think so, yeah. It was like a really new thing.
So like, would Medicare for All really be that much better at addressing this problem with somebody like Donald Trump at the top? I'm not exactly sure. Now, not to say that like our current system is better than a Medicare for All or any type of universal health coverage in any way. I just don't think that like these problems are solved or addressed. And I think sometimes they're, by changing economic systems, and I think sometimes they're misattributed to different types of economic systems as well. I think that industrialization under socialism would lead to just as much climate catastrophe as industrialization under capitalism. socialism.
I have to challenge you on that.
How?
And because you've cited the USSR as an example. But when I say I favor socialism as a solution to many of these problems, I do this with a caveat. The reason I believe this is because I believe the fewer power hierarchies there are in a society, the better things are for everyone. The USSR, the difference between the most powerful man and the least powerful man in that society was infinitely greater than that which we have here today.
Yeah, but
now, I'm not, so if I should be specific, it is not capitalism then that is the issue. It is any system which,
hierarchy?
it's any system which promotes hierarchy.
But so, like,
Feudalism worse than capitalism, and before that the emperors and slaves of old.
So, like, empirically, I can argue economically that I know that's not true. So, for instance, if we were to talk about factory farming versus personal farming, personal farms are so much more disastrous for the environment than doing it on a large scale. Now, I don't know if that would apply to every other type of thing that we could do, like, at scale, but I know that generally producing things at scale is a lot more, or is a lot less damaging to the environment than doing it in highly segregated
I'm not
manners.
opposed to at-scale manufacturing, though. Obviously, factory farming has its problems. I'm not
Sure, of
defending-
course.
Right,
yeah.
But again, I mean, if that factory farm.
But I'm saying
such a
necessarily
horrid
that would
example,
produce some
but
form
if
of
a large-
hierarchy.
Right. But I think that hierarchy, as so far as it exists, because some hierarchies are necessary. There are hierarchies of talent, and there are hierarchies of public relations. You know, obviously, not everyone can advocate for their own rights in a completely equal environment. But a lot of the problems that we see, I think, fundamentally are reinforced by the divide between not just the big firm and the small firm, but the fact that the big firm has one CEO who makes $62 million a year, who personally lobbies to have favorable bills passed, rather than a broad collective of people.
But that's
a
not even
microcosm.
true,
That's
though.
a microcosm of the issue, though. But if you take a look at
it's not just
the
one,
USSR,
it's not just one CEO, though. It's
Well,
an
I have
entire
to-
board of
but
directors
I have-
that's representing the will of all the investors that has a fiduciary responsibility to deliver returns to the company. Like,
okay, well, that the existence of private capital is obviously something that I would take issue with.
Sure,
but
okay.
obviously, I mean, we have to be a little bit
Sorry,
simplistic
you
here.
were gonna
Any
say about the
economic,
USSR.
I mean,
Sure.
God, we could for any length of time, but broadly, I mean, it's. Industrialization has brought about many of the problems that I think people misattribute to capitalism, but
Sure.
I think capitalism reifies and amplifies them.
because
After
it's
all,
good at controlling markets, sure.
It is
So,
good-
like, if you wanted to say like socialism would be way better for the environment than capitalism, because socialist countries would probably be slower to technologically evolve.
That is
Yeah,
not
I mean,
the-
I could probably agree with that, sure.
That's not the
But,
argument.
like, that's
I'm taking.
cheating, right?
Wait, no, well, that is cheating, but I'm not saying that a socialist economy would be slower. I'm saying, though, perhaps in the case of climate change, a socialist economy might have a greater degree of transparency and a greater degree of, what would you say, market accountability that would lead to people, in a democratic sense, being more open to the ideas of taking cuts to their manufacturing, not just the people who work there, but
Yeah.
broadly implementing policy.
We've had
But
this
we- but
conversation
we've
where
seen
I,
this
I
happen
understand the
before.
transparency, but the idea that you could get that an average person would even care about that level of transparency between every single industry, I think is fantastic.
What if we just take a huge issue like climate change and we get rid of the fact that all of the major media outlets that are pushing this climate change as a hoax nonsense are largely funded by people who either directly work with or are buddies with oil and gas companies? If every Murdoch-owned media company, we take Australia, we take the UK, we take the US, these are where the climate change debates are. Nowhere else do we see this degree of contention. These are the wealthiest countries in the world, and somehow we are subject to the greatest amount of disinformation on this. If we just take away that, if we acknowledge the fact that it is in this specific instance, corporate power, the divide between the powerful and the not powerful, that is contributing to misinformation, which is contributing to people's belief that this isn't something we need to make sacrifices for, I think we would have been able to take steps sooner.
And I agree, but my criticism with the media there still stands. But I would argue that in a socialist system, the exact same thing could happen. That a large collection, a co-op-owned firm that has all the workers, if anything, they would be even more driven to misinform the public because every single one of them has a personal vested interest, right? We can argue that a capital owner at ExxonMobil might be, capitalistically motivated to lie to the public about whether or not fossil fuels are damaging the environment, but that's just him. Arguably, his workers shouldn't care as much because they don't get as much money to this for it. In a co-op, that could actually be amplified, where now every single line-level worker feels like they're personally invested in telling people that climate change isn't a big deal because they heard it from their union leader, who heard it from their union leader, who heard it from the guy, at whatever levels, because they're all personally invested in their job, and because now all of them are reaping rewards and benefits from it as well. I think in both these situations, you need a third-party body to come in and figure out what's going on. This is the EPA. These are guys that they're not a co-op, they're not worker-owned, they're not capital-owned. This is a body that's supposed to make relatively unbiased decisions about, the status of do these people harm the environment or not. I don't think that making it all collective helps it. I don't think having a single capital owner there, lobbying, I wouldn't trust anything he says. But in all cases, it has to come from a third body. It's not, the economic system doesn't take care of itself.
I'm not arguing we should get rid of a third body. I'm fine with regulatory industries. And I would expect there to be pretty severe regulations on any cooperatively owned industries. I don't think they get to get away scot-free just because they're cooperatively owned. The issue is that this fundamentally is the concept of class consciousness and of class interest. If you take, for example, let's say we've unionized or we've collectivized like the oil industry. I do believe that the people within that system would be incentivized to lie about the extent to which climate change is like affecting our system. The difference, though, is that the system through which they have pushed that misinformation isn't just the oil industry and the government and the media. It's a massive higher order hierarchy that is pretty much entirely orchestrated by CEOs, stockholders, venture capitalists, higher level politicians, everyone essentially with a tremendous amount of economic or political power, and it is the union of these interests that allowed this upper level system that subverts our democracy to be built. I agree that the oil company would have an interest in collectively owned, pushing this anti-climate change nonsense, but it would be them and them alone in a void. There wouldn't be this huge network, this architecture.
Yeah.
I agree. I understand, of course, and I'd be happy to talk about it with you more in the future, but we can look previously at other instances where power has been democratized, and this does lead to greater clarity in issues that you would expect the little people would have a similar interest in pushing misinformation on.
I guess those would be the cases where I would want to see it because I guess in the only three examples that I'm very familiar with would be the USSR, China under Mao, and then Vietnam.
I don't own these examples. I just disavow.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
disavow.
That's the thing. You get to disavow every system that you don't like, but now I have to inherit all the messy atrocities that are the current capitalist system.
All I want to talk about is the next step. I'm not talking about anarchism or the glorious post-capital revolution.
Yeah, and I
just
understand.
think, what do we do right now? We can't seem to make any ground on this, on climate change.
And that's kind of what I was getting at earlier. Is where do you want to see the movement go from here? Yeah. Here's an idea that I really like.
Tell me what to do. Give me instructions.
My libertarian is coming out from my teenage years. Seeing states try things, I think, is a really good step forward. When some states are like, hey, we're sanctuary cities, we're not going to report people to ICE, fuck you. And then seeing, well, how does that play out? How is California impacted by illegal immigration versus other states? California, God, I haven't looked at how it's going to impact my taxes yet, but I think California has a form of social health care right now. Medi-Cal?
They recently, yeah. I think they implemented.
There's a penalty.
Wasn't it really recent, or am I thinking something different?
I think so. There's a penalty that started last year or this year for it and everything. I think I should have read more about this.
There was another state that's implementing a Medicare for all type thing.
Yeah,
isn't
possibly.
There? Was it
Colorado? If states try this step by step, I mean, I don't know if I can really say this, but arguably, it's kind of how gay marriage kind of came about. I mean, it was from the Supreme Court, but it started by state by state by state. Yeah, marijuana legalization, cannabis was legalized state by state. Hopefully, the DEA or somebody, whoever comes in next, finally fucking changes that. But maybe pushing for these policies on this is kind of what I'm talking about in the horrible incremental change, but pushing these policies on a state by state level, seeing them being effective on a state by state level, and then being hey, federally, these people do this, why don't we all do this? It works for them, the revenue being raised from a lot of these states that legalize cannabis is pretty inarguable, and there aren't all these horrible downstream effects that people said they were. People aren't getting high and driving their children into fucking trees constantly or any crazy shit like that. Pushing for those at a local level, I think, can be incredibly effective.
Okay, I completely agree with that. Mm-hmm. I think I'm generally one who pushes federal power, I think, because at least in recent years, there have been a lot of examples of the government cracking down on, the misbehavior of some of the states I disagree with more politically. Mm-hmm. But I think if we could have testing grounds for some of this stuff, I completely agree with that. I think that's an excellent solution. Sure. With allowing sort of more broad. And that's a great wedge issue too, because the Confederate types, those South will rise again types, always push states' rights. Okay, that and guns. You got to find the wedge issues to talk with them about. You're pro? Are you pro gun?
I like gun.
I know you like guns personally, but
every national conversation we have about guns is really stupid because the only thing we talk about are assault rifles, which kill 200 people a year. They're problems that relate to guns have. It's a complicated conversation, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm generally very pro gun. I don't mean to hold you account to all the problems with capitalism or anything like that. I understand that we both recognize there's a ton of wrong done in the world. It's more a building sense of frustration. I feel that I know a lot of other people are feeling right now. We are very quickly headed towards like populism, just being like the rule of law in this country. But it looks like I personally believe that Biden will lose to Trump. It seems like there's leeway to go on both sides there. I don't really know. No matter what, though, I don't think the right's going to go back to like Mitt Romney era corporate. Like, clean.
It'll be interesting to see what happens.
I have no idea what happens after Trump. I don't know how they replace the cult of personality. But I don't know there's an increasing, populist fervor on the left, too. Bernie Sanders, maybe he didn't get, within a hair's breadth of the presidency this time. But, I mean, he's a socialist, and him getting this close means something.
He's not a socialist. I would be careful of that, but
I think he is. You don't think I think he's covert about it, but I think he genuinely. I mean, with all the stuff he said,
I think he's firmly a sock dem, and maybe he flirts with democratic socialism. The most socialist thing I've ever heard Bernie Sanders say was. It's not part of the Green New Deal where they suggest 20%
workplace democracy. 20% of each core.
That's like the most socialist thing I've ever heard.
By the way, based. Just want to say that publicly known.
Sure.
I think he's covertly a socialist. God.
Yeah, maybe he might be. I think that labeling himself that way probably hurt him more than anything, rather than just calling himself a sock dem.
That's what I wonder about, though, and I think that's relevant to what I want to ask you as well, because. I think we agree broadly that there's a unified need for people who are pushing policy and people who are running around the streets with their picket signs, what have you, being accused of being like Antifa terrorists by Fox News. That's our job, I think. But I think what Bernie Sanders did was very, very special. Not necessarily his bid for the presidency, but is inspiring this left-leaning populism in so many people in this country, and him destigmatizing the term socialism a little bit, maybe not to the Republicans, but at the very least to moderates and Democrats. And I think this is only going to lead down the line to angrier and angrier elections, to more and more terrorist attacks. We have a lot of white nationalist terrorist attacks going on right now. I think that we're going to see an increase in this.
Ecofascism.
Ecofascism. We're going to bring it about, and I think things are going to grow more and more violent with time, and I just don't know if there's a stopgap, a democratic stopgap, a civil way of processing these antagonisms outside of some radical shit. And to that I ask you, what would you like to see revolutionaries be doing? Obviously not taking to the streets with their, AK-47s, but what would you like to see them be doing in terms of propagating information? Because you criticize a lot. I know Kyle Kulinski isn't technically a socialist, but by God, he sounds like one when he talks about the media conspiracies and what have you.
This is a hard question because what I want is way different than what you should probably do for politics. I just don't like it when people say dumb shit that is just not true.
I try not to propagate misinformation. I try my best.
I think for the most, I don't think I generally hear you say anything really stupid.
At the one point, I will admit, I'm owning up to this. When I heard the 1.5 trillion thing, I just saw the number. I didn't know it was the Fed.
Sure.
I just thought it was Trump. So I did the student loan thing. Now I know it's the Fed, print money, burr. Now I know. Okay, the memes educated me.
Yeah, I guess like my two biggest things I think were the 2 points that I brought up earlier. Is one, recognize that you have to work within the whole system. Like being anti-establishment is sexy when you're a teenager, but eventually you have to grow up and realize if you want to get shit done,
it's sexy the
you got to
whole way
work within
through.
the establishment, right? Bernie Sanders, I believe when the postmortems are being written about that campaign, a lot of it is going to come down to him not reaching out for the endorsements that he needed to. Bloomberg had more endorsements than Bernie Sanders' campaign, and a lot of that was a deliberate effort on their part. Maybe they thought being anti-establishment was sexy, and that was part of their draw. But you need to have friends in places. You need to have people in the media that you can communicate with, that you can talk to, that can help you with messaging. You need to have people in Congress that will actually sign your bills. The Green New Deal looks good on paper, doesn't mean anything if it's not being passed. In an era where we are passing records amount of legislation through the House that's all dying on the Senate.
Desk.
There are.
It's a graveyard.
So the one thing is you have your allies. Okay, even if you disagree, that's fine, but don't shit on them for their disagreements. You know, like AOC's like ex-campaign manager shitting on Democrats in vulnerable districts because they weren't ready to fucking march out with, you know, like a hammer and sickle flag. Not cool. Not good. Don't go hard after people that are on your side is the one thing. And then the second thing is recognize that there are lots of positions available to be worked by lots of different types of people. That we wouldn't hold a political activist to the same standard that we would hold a political operative, like somebody in Congress or whatever, or that we wouldn't hold something like a media person, you know, that
he said it himself, you know, organizer-in-chief, not commander-in-chief.
Exactly, yeah.
I feel like he acted like an activist
Yeah,
in
and
ways that maybe, I agree
for sure.
with you very much.
In a
with the
dramatic
endorsement
shift
thing.
from my 2016 self, to quote Hillary Clinton, it's very important sometimes to have a private and a public position. That you don't go out as a congressperson, you don't go out every day on your sleeve with the most aggressive plan of action. You know, you take what you can get votes on.
You know, but there is sort of a slippery slope there, because eventually that sort of complacency can lead you to being the same, like paper mache, like boilerplate.
That's all you can do as a politician, though. The activists are the ones that have to drive American public
Well, that
opinion.
depends on how many politicians are willing to link their arms together and really get change done.
Well, you can link your arms together all you want, but the longest you can do it for is 2 years. And then after that, if you lose all your offices and then everything gets rolled back.
I think you can do it while keeping, you know, the support of your Democratic constituency.
Well, that's the challenge, right? Is you have to push for as much as you can. You know, like the AOCs.
Bernie Sanders is a very popular senator, I think. Isn't he the most popular senator in the?
He might be, but that's
but it means something. It means he can be him, which
in
he has
Vermont.
been. Try in Vermont,
right?
but
AOC
that's a
can
step.
do it in a plus 60 blue
Yes, in a
district.
very safe-
That's great,
but
but
they
these
serve
aren't
a
the people that are
important
getting
role.
the legislation passed. We need the people from the vulnerable districts to come out to win those seats, to flip them in the House, and maybe in 4 years, hopefully maybe the Senate too. These are the people that we really need that are going to drive real legislative change in America.
What do you do when they're not doing their job? Because right now, AOC, Bernie Sanders, they're doing great jobs being activists, you know, disguised as politicians. Fantastic. They get so many likes and retweets. You know, everyone loves them.
Yeah.
Within their own constituencies.
Exactly.
But when it comes to people like Pelosi, for example, and I admit I'm not completely read up on her entire history. God, you know, she's been doing stuff for a while. But it does feel very often like she's not fulfilling her end of the bargain. You know, the goal is supposed to be people like me or Sanders or AOC or whatever, we're supposed to be very angry, and we get people's interests drummed up, and then they take those interests, and people like Pelosi are supposed to filter them through the machine and make something happen. But
Well,
lately it feels like her and people like her aren't just overwhelmed by how ineffective the system is, they're also actively contributing to an inability to push forward certain measures.
But they have to work within like what they have.
But then what do we do?
You have to, public opinion has to change.
But how do you do that without...
Not by telling everybody to vote on some radical piece of legislation that's going to get them all kicked out of Congress and then bring in all Republicans.
I would be interested to see how much that actually happens.
So there was a big study done by oh God, I don't remember.
Is
the
this
name.
like is like the Medicare for All issue lead to a higher percentage chance? Of
Yeah, it
people
was like the
being-
Medicare
right.
for All issue was a huge wedge issue, and almost every Democrat that ran on it lost horribly in the districts that they tried to run. And in all of the contested districts where people actually managed to flip a seat, it was for people that ran opposed to Medicare for All.
Yeah.
That like those types of important wedge issues are.
Which brings us back to manufacturing consent and how corporate media keeps
Well,
people
then
from voting.
manufacture the consent.
That's what
Bernie
that's what I'm
Sanders
trying
raised
to
more
do.
money than any other politician. You've got the money, you've got the support around the country. Now you've got the social media support, you've got the alternative media, you've got the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is arguably maybe one of the most popular politicians
Yeah,
in
I'd
the
say so.
entire world. So you've got the social capital, you've got the financial capital to some extent. Bernie Sanders raises a crazy amount of money. Now you have to get the political capital. You have to start changing people's opinions in some of these areas. You have to get some of these people on your side politically.
Well, wait, you're talking to me like I disagree with. I agree with you
Oh, sure.
completely. This is, but this is at least fundamentally non-electoral. This isn't just you run with your ideas. This is we are going to orchestrate through our own media a change in the public opinion, and then we'll be able to get our cool shit done.
Sure.
Which is, of course, how, I mean, this is why, you know, he calls himself organizer-in-chief. This is fundamentally activist work. But if you unify the activist work with the money necessary to actually change people's opinions, then you can really get work done. The only issue is Bernie Sanders has made a lot of money, a tremendous amount of money, but in terms of his overall spending capacity, you know, he's a fraction of what Bloomberg could do. It would take one billionaire in this country, one secret socialist billionaire, to single-handedly do what the Murdochs have done, or the Koch brothers, and propagate a new revolution.
I think to some extent,
Dirty billionaire money, I know, but
I think to some extent, I think that there is an uncomfortable reality that is settling. I think that a little bit of this election has kind of been a referendum on how much does money in politics actually drive public opinion, at least when it comes to campaign fundraising. Because people would have led us to believe, especially progressives, that it would have had a far more greater impact. Steyer was a billionaire. Bloomberg didn't outspend Steyer by that much, and that dude is a WH omega lol. Nobody knows who Steyer is outside of South Carolina, where he's still, did he get third place in South Carolina? In the one state that he banked everything on. This guy spent hundreds of millions of dollars, got nothing. Bernie Sanders, Biden won in states where he spent like $6,000.
No,
and
but
Bernie Sanders. Now we can talk about earned media, unearned media.
Right. Well, I would say it's not the money matters, but not so much in the campaign financing. It matters more in who the moneyed interests actually believe should be supported. And Bloomberg was able to buy before he stepped on the debate stage. Imagine if he wasn't, a horrible, proto-fascist. But imagine if he was actually a human being with human skin instead of reptilian skin. He was able to buy 13% of the vote. I mean, that's a
Did he buy it though, or was he able to get by in his name recognition as a 3-term mayor of New York and as somebody that has the Bloomberg media empire?
I'm pretty sure if he had run without the $400 million ad buy, you have to admit it must have contributed substantially. A lot of people who I remember there was some study done on who you supported and how recently you'd made that decision and why you made that decision.
Oh, and Bloomberg was very, very, very. People were recent, but they were more likely to vote for anybody
because
else
it was a placeholder.
It was a placeholder.
Yeah, you just see the name on TV. Same way when I'm driving down, I don't know all the local city councilmen, but I see names on signs, and I pray to God when I'm at the voting booth, oh Jesus, I hope it wasn't a Republican's house. When I drove by that sign. The degree to which money matters in this sector or another, again, I think it's very multivariate. But it is undeniable that the ability to move money behind the scenes is one of the greatest sort of contributors to the manufacturing consent element. Again, I bring up Murdoch a lot, and I bring up the Koch brothers a lot, because as somebody who deals with a lot of conservative media online, almost all of it trickles down from them. Stephen Crowder or Ben Shapiro and a lot of other outlets. Dave Rubin. And these are, this YouTube. If they're willing to bankroll millions of dollars to prop up these highly effective, conservative, propaganda machines, they're absolutely doing it at the higher level too. And we see what we can see. Sometimes the money is, dark, and we can only really assume through collective interest what they are and aren't doing. It's so frustrating to me that by way of my political agenda being opposed to the people who have money, we are almost constitutionally incapable of assembling the same kind of media influence, regardless of how popular our ideas are, as somebody on their side would be. You can be a conservative, sound halfway decent, look good in a suit. There are people line up to give you money to say your stupid shit on YouTube or anywhere else, any news show. On our side, all of it has to be blood and bone, working nonstop, 18 rallies a day, grassroots fundraising. It's exhausting. Bernie Sanders, he did something unprecedented with all the money that he's raised. And he's done good, and I love him for it, but it's not even close to the media influence that you can buy with real money. And I don't know if there's a way to move through that system forward.
Yeah, I guess one point of agreement we have is that the way that the media structure definitely needs to change. That tying a for-profit motive on media is probably a very cancerous thing to do for society.
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe a national. I know the BBC is horrible, but I think maybe they're
horrible. But when we say the BBC is horrible, is it horrible like Fox News is horrible? I
Probably
don't think
not.
that's
No,
true.
no. It's. They're pretty. I know they mistreated Corbyn a lot, but I don't think they're like Fox News, Matt. God. Well, do you think then? This is what I always say. I'm very revolutionary sentiment or what have you. Obviously, revolutions are bloody scary business. Anyone unironically who's online LARPing about how they're gonna can't wait to Molotov their local ice station even ignoring the practicality. Poor optics. God, get them out of here. But I've always said this. Eventually, one day, there's going to be a revolution. I think probably it's going to be on account of climate change. Climate migration is going to force a bunch of generally poor, generally brown people to move all across the world, hundreds of millions of them. And I mean, if we see what 7 million refugees did to Europe, 1 billion people in Europe, and how much far-right sentiment is rising over there, I can't imagine what that's going to do. And eventually, you know, liberal democracy won't be able to keep up with populist sentiment, something's going to break, and then we have...
The authoritarian regime's going to come in and deal with it like China
And
does.
that is where I'm concerned, because on that day, which way the needle, the New York Times election needle goes, depends on whether in this country socialists or fascists, and I would consider the Republican Party to be a more or less openly fascist organization, or as much as you can be in a democracy. Which way we go just depends on which one's more popular. And I worry we need to get as many people as possible on board with the Bernie train or further, you know, if for no other reason than because eventually it's going to be one extreme or the other. And I'm sure you would agree with me. You would rather have people with my, you know, lofty ideals in some position in charge rather than somebody like Owen Benjamin or a Christchurch shooter-esque, you know.
I guess, I don't know.
far-right
It
populist.
depends on what flavor of leftism or
Do you
fascism
think I'm a
you're talking about.
Stalinist?
Just a few minutes. We can keep
Yeah.
going if you guys would like for several more minutes, but then when you're ready for Q&A.
Oh, I love Q&A.
Hit us up.
You know, what I think we both are like freedom very much. I'm sure I would not be satisfied with any revolutionary sentiment that was authoritarian in nature. I've lost
Yeah,
a
of
lot
course.
of
A surprising
left
number of them
to-
seem to bend that way now.
I think it's changing. I think that authoritarianism and populism go hand in hand very often because you want that strong person.
You just
to
want
come
that
in.
strong leader to show you,
fix
because
everything.
problems are complicated and you don't know how the fuck you're going to fix anything because everything is so complicated these days. Yeah.
I sympathize with the sentiment, but I'm sure you know with like the tankies and stuff. I've been pretty adamant in not promoting any of those sentiments.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know. So yeah, hopefully we can get good. Do you want to do Q&A?
Yeah. What do you got for us?
Excellent. So we'll do a quick Q&A, folks. We definitely won't get to all the questions. We appreciate all of your questions. We'll try our best, but like I said, be prepared that we might not. And we want to say a special, huge thanks to several people, as this has been so much fun, folks. We really encourage you to check out the links in the description. I've got Destiny and Vash. I put their links in the description for you. So if you're listening and you're like, I like that, I want to hear more, you can hear more. And also want to say, in addition to the thank you to both Vosh and Destiny, who have come here, thanks so much, also who have made it possible for this charity drive today. This is the only time that I will say, hey, do a super chat. 100% of your super chat we will be giving to a charity. We're going to talk about it afterwards. We're going to look for a responsible, reliable charity that is helping alleviate the negative effects of coronavirus. So, want to let you know that's an option still. And last but not least, want to say thanks so much to Adam Friended. I have put his link in the description. This is a beautiful studio, and I have to be honest, it's really hard to find a good studio and a person who's going to give you a good deal. And so I really appreciate how kind he has been in making this possible as well. So thanks so much to Adam. And with that, folks, we've got a lot of questions, so thanks for being here. I'm going to be going through these as quick as I can. And so last but not least, do want to remind you, if you haven't, please do check out their links in the description. Sorry about that, folks. I'm pulling up the questions now. How embarrassing. I'm stalling.
I was getting nervous. I thought you were going to pull a Sargon.
Steven?
I'd rather
Okay.
the alt-right win than the SJWs.
No, I don't think so.
All right, just making sure.
I think I'd rather, as much as I hate the class shit, I'd probably prefer that than like a more racialized thing, which most fascism tends to be.
Yeah.
All right, folks, thanks so much. So first, Katya, thanks for your super chat, who said, thanks for the interesting discussion. Love it. So that's to you guys. Want to say thanks so much to you again. Then we have Mothra J. Disco, who says, Republicans' platform is equal to killing the poor for the lulz. Thanks so much for that, Mothra J. Disco.
That's my official response. It's true. They are sociopaths. They do just want you dead. There's no nuance to it. It's that simple. They're like fairy tale villains.
We got a critic out there. Thanks for that. Peacekeeper, thanks for your super chat. They said, let's see. I didn't know you did debate Molyneux.
Oh yeah. It was a few weeks ago. It was a lot of fun. He's very smooth on top of and inside of the skull.
Oh, that's really interesting. I'll have to check that out. Let's see. Bryce Nance, thanks for your super chat. They said, I bet if you two had a baby, it would be a super smart and charismatic socialist revolutionary. Thank you all three for this conversation.
That's very nice. I like that. So Steel Savior.
Take the politics from my side of the family, I guess.
Steel Savior, thanks for your super chat. They said, Destiny, everyone I know in real life that is Bernie or bust is very poor and needs health care as soon as humanly possible and needs prison reform now or they will lose loved ones.
Okay, I don't know what to... I mean, a lot of people need health care. A lot of people need prison reform. I don't know what the response is to that. I think, so he was trying to counter my earlier claim about being Bernie or bust or whatever. I have a hard time believing, I guess this guy's anecdote maybe is true, but I have a hard time believing that these people are like, oh, okay, well, I'm okay with another 4 years of Trump because I don't want Biden. Like, if you like are genuinely hurting for healthcare, or if you genuinely have people that are like affected negatively by the prison industrial complex, you know you're better off under Biden than you are under Trump. And to pretend that you can just deal with another 4 years of whatever sounds like some shit that a person would say that doesn't have to deal with those problems. But that's my impression of that.
I'm not Bernie or bust myself. I do think sometimes people overstate the degree to which accelerationism is a privileged position, but it's really complicated.
Sure.
Gotcha. Thanks very much. Dinobot2, thanks so much. They said, hasn't Destiny criticized many progressives as being one-issue voters? Seems to contradict his suggestion that progressives should only focus hard on one or two issues and not compromise on those.
I think most people are one-issue voters. In 2016, I was a single-issue voter on campaign finance. I'm trying to think of the most favorable way. When would I have said I've criticized somebody for being a one-issue voter? Like I've said multiple times, like people don't care about foreign policy. People don't really care hardcore about a lot of economic. I think most people are one-issue voters. I don't know what I would have said to contradict that.
I think I'd agree with that, yeah. Or at least if people do, because I don't think most people vote based on policy, but if they do, I think they, very
They'll pick like one
single.
or two, like they're like abortion. This is my abortion can. Like my mom would probably single issue vote on something like abortion.
Yeah.
Or like some people like I want 15 an hour minimum wage, or this is like the minute. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Next, Surus the Skeptic, formerly known as Surus the Skeptic. Now, Surus says, just dropping some support for Vosh.
I love you too, Cyrus. Always happy to see you in chat.
Lots of love. Steven Steen, very trollish, says, Bloomberg should give $1 million to all instead of hoarding. Very nice.
1 million to every American? I think that checks out. I think he can afford that.
That's
That's our economic stimulus package right there.
Don't think he has that much money.
It's a million, billion.
a rule.
Sorry. No.
That tweet went live on, was it MSNBC?
Which one?
Oh, God.
I think it was MSNBC, yeah.
Was it MSNBC where they had the tweet where it was like, Bloomberg spent $425 million on the election. That's enough to give every single American $1 million.
Wait, did that actually?
Yeah, it was unironically on. Yeah,
That's really funny.
Yeah. Not the best math skills there.
That's very nice. Aurora, thanks for your super chat. They said, Destiny, what alternative to democracy do you refer to?
This is like, I'm going to give this ultra fucking lame answer. Democracy is the worst system except for every other system that's been tried. I mean, I have problems with democracy, but I don't know. I mean, like, arguably, I think everybody would ideally want to live under an authoritarian regime that agrees with every single thing they agree with. So, I mean, obviously I would be in favor of that, but realistically, it's not possible. But the only worry that I have right now is, you saw this with Serbia the other day, where the leader was referring to Xi as like his brother and shit.
I don't know the story.
Basically, the way that my uneducated opinion is that it looks like China is trying to move into a position where they're going to become like the leader of the world, that they're going to take that position away from America, because in a democratic system you're too slow to respond to like external pressure, which is I guess it's one of the big reasons why fascists come about, is because they say the democratic body can't respond to it.
Represent
China,
the will of the people.
under its authoritarian government, is very, very, very quick to deal with problems, whether it's climate change,
coronavirus too. Initially some journalists, but
initially
afterwards,
they
the
and now they're
Wuhan
reaching out to other
quarantine.
countries to help them too, and they're taking like a leadership role on that, while America is trying to buy up the rights to the fucking vaccine from fucking Germany.
Yeah, only if we get it, folks.
Jesus Christ.
Horrifying, funny, but
Yeah.
God.
So yeah, I mean, like, Yeah, there are definitely really strong strengths to authoritarian regimes that I think democratic regimes are going to have to figure out how to contend with. We used to do it via alliances, but those have been faltering lately, so we'll see, I guess.
I just want to disavow China's closer to a fascist regime than it is a communist one, much closer. I have no association whatsoever. Okay, don't email me.
Thanks so much. Next up, we have a super chat from Osu Osu. Thanks so much. They said, what will each debater do to stop the tyranny of family courts? What would you propose to replace the evil system that oppresses innocent fathers?
I think that you should do something about it, but I don't think it's this huge issue that's like so pressing that I pay it a lot of attention. I mean, yeah, it sucks that courts can be biased against men in some ways, but it's just not something I think about much, I guess.
Yeah, I think a lot of people overstate the severity of the problem, but I do want to say that the reasons why family courts are often considered, I don't know the exact data, to be biased against men is usually because they see women to be sort of intrinsically better caregivers or mothers than like men could be fathers, which is a product of patriarchal sentiment. So ultimately, this is an issue where gender egalitarianism would be sort of amicable even to men. I think men are often much more hurt by sexism towards women than people are willing to realize.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Let's see. Clever to swear. I like this. That's sassy. They say, I'm happy to donate my money for you to get a better camera for these in real life debates. This camera is low quality, but debate is not. Keep it up. Well, we're glad you like the content. That's encouraging, and I do agree. This camera is our backup camera. We had a tough start. But by the way, I want to say thanks so much to Destiny and Vosh for their flexibility and patience, as it was a slow start. And also, we're streaming on Steven's data right now. Steven, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
I just sat and watched as other people fixed it. It was great.
You did a great job watching. It was excellent. So, no, it's been a pleasure. So thanks so much for just renewing for any new ones that have come in. 21st Century Socialist. Thanks. They said, Vosh and Destiny, what are your thoughts on technology being integrated more into the system, or at least financial experts and scientists having more influence on policy?
You want to go first?
So in a perfect world, I think, is it called a technocracy, where scientists run everything? I would like that. The problem is that scientists it's so complicated. Chances are, if I were to go and poll a whole bunch of scientific people out of an area, they're going to overrepresent for certain segments of society. They're probably going to be more likely to be wealthy, probably going to be more likely to be men, probably going to be more likely to be white. So I don't know how effective that body would be in addressing things like the fact that women and African Americans can't get painkillers prescribed to them in the same way that white people can, or if they would care as much to research different things related to abortion if they're all men. Like on paper, the technocracy sounds awesome. Like, oh, cool! I can have like a literal scientist in charge of deciding how we should like, how we should do like Medicare programs or whatever. Like these people that study this, that would be awesome. But in reality, I don't know exactly how that system would play out, just because of the preconceived biases from that highly selected and segmented part of the population.
Technology terrifies me. One of the problems I have with the idea of a technocracy, I suppose, in addition to that, is that power structures need to be seen to be challenged, and the more abstraction and the more technology we introduce to how our decision making is made, the more difficult it is for the average person to understand and thus to challenge. Right now, it's very easy for anyone to look at like our government and say like, okay, something here is wrong, nothing's getting passed the Senate, president's kind of dumb, what can we do? It's easy to make those assessments. But if you have an incredibly complicated hierarchy of tech masters, of Adeptus Mechanicus from Warhammer 40k Mars, along with AI that no one outside the people who produced it really understand, it makes it really tough to actually know what's going wrong when something goes wrong and you don't know what biases are being concealed. And that scares me. Technology in many ways hurts us. There are some phenomenal things. I mean, I love what I'm able to do. I love being able to stream, great. But to the effect that this has had, I guess, in the social environment of the internet, along with many, many other things, I mean, there is good reason to give thought to the idea that maybe some technological advancements shouldn't be consumed and adapted quite as quickly as we're currently doing.
Social media is one of those.
Yeah, I mean, the average American has less friends, less partners, loses their virginity later. Everything is worse in every social metric now.
Social media was originally a way to augment your social life, and now it's become a replacement for it. And even, oh my God, I was on like a Raj show a while ago where I was arguing with a guy about how like Tinder is not the same as meeting girls in real life. People like are literally thinking that like these online forums are literal replacements for like real life human interaction.
You still go out and meet girls in real life?
Sometimes.
Oh. Yeah, it's this boomer over here. Okay,
I just
geez,
got back
we're
from
rolling
Canada, right?
back to the previous
yeah,
century.
The real life interactions are very, very, very
Yeah,
important.
they are. Just physiologically, we're evolved. We need those things.
Yeah, for sure.
Lynn L., thanks for your super chat, who said, thanks, dads, good debate. Very nice. Prasad Tendulkar, thanks for your super chat. They said, Destiny, do you think the way that you approach politics as an intellectual exercise creates a natural bias for status quo, centrist ideology, and policy?
It's possible. I mean, like, I would be lying to say that I am free of all the biases of society. I wish I could think of an example, but like, it's entirely possible that like certain systems or certain schools of thought could, to some extent, become self-perpetuating, that they reinforce themselves. I really enjoy philosophy and I really enjoy psychology. Both of these things, I hope, would kind of give me tools to make sure that I'm not like completely getting lost up my own shit. Like Vosh said earlier, and like I truly believe, I'm not like ideologically married to a particular system. I'm a pretty results-oriented guy. If socialism, works out in some country, or if worker co-ops were really great, then I would be 100% in favor of like expand, subsidized loans from banks to co-ops, do all these things to get them started because make it, better for people. I mean. Yeah, it's a hard question because it requires me to lie to say like, nah, I'm totally free of like any type of status quo, any type of centrist thought or whatever. I don't think I could realistically say that. I would like to think that like I do enough research or I do enough homework to make sure that like I'm not getting totally lost down like what a mainstream opinion is, and I have no concept of anything that could exist that would challenge that. Would you say like heterodoxy or whatever? But yeah.
As someone who has no biases whatsoever, I do think that's an interesting question because we pursue this very differently. It is intellectual, like finding the most correct position, whereas I have like a set of political principles or morals that I want achieved. And to me, what's good is whatever leads in that direction. That's why you don't like rhetoric, right? Because it moves away from the raw sort of data of the conversation.
Not what's the most correct, but what's the most convincing.
Right, which I mean, I personally, I love rhetoric. I love public speaking, But I do think it's an interesting question. I think ultimately the failings, and this isn't a shot or anything, because I think there are failings to both sides. But one of the concerns I have with very intellectual, policy-driven discourse is I think it predisposes people towards working only within lines that have been drawn. And often those are good lines. We don't want folks shooting each other in the street over every disagreement. Sometimes the lines are bad, and that's where the discourse gets really hazy. When can you cross it? When is it appropriate to? Of course, as I think you pointed out very fairly, the inability to function appropriately within electoral politics is a pretty big failing for many activist types. So
Yeah.
it's definitely something to be learned there.
Yeah, on both sides. So yeah, like maybe recognizing that like, well, some lines are good. Maybe it's better to work within an electoral system rather than doing everything in a revolutionary manner. Maybe that's a good thing to recognize. Maybe crazy ideas. Maybe you don't actually have to raise taxes for any of the programs you fund. Maybe the money machine goes burr. It's possible. I mean, like that's something where
it does go burr.
mainstream
That's
economic
true.
thought was that inflation should be so much higher now for how low the Fed's target interest rates were for so long, and it hasn't happened. Maybe the money machine can burr a little bit more.
I don't
know,
have
yeah.
any opinion. I don't actually know. I know libertarians are very mad about it, because
Sure.
I saw a funny
well,
meme.
libertarians don't understand anything about money at all.
Well, I saw a funny meme where there was a Wojak with a yellow and black bow tie, and he was mad that the money machine
was
would burr.
going
And that's
burr.
how I know. That's the theory that I read before
Sure,
coming
okay.
here,
Thanks so much. Next up, appreciate your super chat from Wendell Curry, who asked, Destiny, what percentage of Bernie supporters do you think are Bernie or bust?
I actually don't know.
In terms of what it's going to come down to for voting, I think the last election cycle, it was very, very, very low. So I don't imagine that it'll be a high percentage. The polling data showed that Bernie and Yang were like 50% of the people pledged that they would support whoever the Democratic nominee was, whereas it was like 85-ish% for all the other candidates. But I think that once the general rolls around, you can only watch Trump for so long without like this bubbling hatred boiling up. Even Hassan on stream was like, Jesus Christ, like this guy is fucking blue pilling me so hard towards Biden because listening to Trump talk about this is fucking abysmal. So I mean, yeah.
100%. After Super Tuesday and Super Tuesday 2 and stuff, all my chat's very angry, and the anger dies down. Then we watch Trump's the national emergency address. We're like, I'm riding with Biden, baby. Oh, baby. Getting rid of those corn pops, coast to coast.
You might have to. So you're going to sacrifice a few young children to the Biden.
Oh yeah, just feed them in. Listen, the bloodbaths, nothing honestly compared to what we're dealing with right now.
Thanks so much. Next up, this is a question for Vosh. Oh. Vosh, does socialism work if you think that people are inherently selfish?
The belief that people are inherently selfish, if one were to subscribe to that, would be a belief, I think, that contradicts with many of the principles of, not the principles of socialism, but with the effective implementation of many socialist policies. It should be noted, though, that I'm agnostic on the subject of general human behavior. I think humans behave more or less in ways that they are conditioned to based on improving their outcomes within a given environment. To me, it's all about giving everyone the greatest possible mathematical odds of acting in ways that are beneficial to society. And I do believe that if there are selfish tendencies within people inherently, which I believe there are, we get, our life, we do what we can with it. I believe it's very important to consider the many ways in which socialist policies can be implemented such as to optimize their desire for self-preservation or self-gratification, not just to base those policies on the belief that everyone is good. I try to operate off the assumption that people, even in a socialist society, would be as scumbaggy as they are today, more or less.
I don't even think it's a good. I think I would reject even the premise. Well, people are selfish, so they would like capitalism more than socialism. Well, like if you were truly selfish, wouldn't you want to own a part of the business that you work at, or like wouldn't you want a larger share of that idea that like a selfish person prefers capitalism? I think is a bit too simplistic.
Well said, comrade.
Yeah, of like how people actually function in society.
Thanks so much. Next up, appreciate your super chat from Vosh. Do you think that Destiny's claim that a lot of the left are class reductionists is true? And what are some steps that we leftists can do to help with this? Shout out to both DGG and VGG.
Yes, the bastard offchild of DGG. No, I do believe that at times Destiny's claims concerning the frequency with which people are class reductionist may be a little bit overstated. I will say this, it's more of a problem on the internet than it is in real life. There are a lot of very edgy people who came out of a sort of disillusioned, South Park-esque, caring is, gay, lol, mentality, and then they became class conscious and they realized, oh God, we're all being fucked over by corporations, what do we do? And I think unfortunately that this does lend people towards a stupid poll-esque class reductionist view of the world. Ultimately, the goal of socialism is human liberation. If you believe in socialism but do not believe in, say, for example, an abolition of racism or sexism as separate and distinct problems which must be addressed, then I think you're missing the goddamn point. Also, as a side, I do believe that there is some value in rejecting liberal identity politics, but liberal identity politics is named as such because it's interested less in liberation and more in fanfare and pandering. I think it's appropriate to reject that without then saying, oh, wow, you care about racism in movies? Wow, lib,
Gotcha, thanks so much. And it's an interesting one, short and sweet. The Snake Hat asked Destiny, how will capitalism deal with global warming?
There's two different answers I can give. One answer would be that capitalism, as the cost of fossil fuel and the price of pollution rises and rises, is going to find some awesome technological innovation that is going to power us through into the new age of green energy, because it's going to be so cost effective, and great entrepreneurs like Elon Musk and other people are going to be like heralding that movement. And then the other answer is that the profit motive right now is not tied to environmental harm whatsoever, and we're just on a crash course for destruction, and nothing will happen. So, I mean, I don't know. I think I would say that the government should try to incentivize as much as possible investment into alternative energies. Yeah, but I don't think that I don't think that any economic system necessarily addresses climate change. I think that has to be spurred on by some like artificial construct, like a government saying, "Hey, do this thing."
I just want to say, whether or not you believe socialism would be a solution to climate change, and I do to an extent, it is inarguable, I think, that capitalism has not been the solution to climate change thus far. The problem is, here, one way or another. We are very much not meeting needed thresholds when it comes to curtailing greenhouse gas emissions.
Thanks so much. And Ariel Fernandez, thanks for your super chat. They said, Vosh was the Italian Communist Party, which came first place in the 1984 European Parliament election in Italy, an actual communist party.
I don't know why you people think I know everything.
You don't know about the 1984 Communist Party in Italy?
Well, oh, please. Go ahead.
I mean, it's your area. Like, I'm actually cringing.
Yeah.
I'm actually cringing that you weren't aware of the broad platform that they ran on. This is the most support that communists had gotten in Italy in the past 40 years.
Shut
God.
up. I can answer this almost tautologically. If it's a political party, then it could not have been a communist party. Like, unless there was some crazy, rejection of the traditional class hierarchies in Italy that I am not aware of back during the 1980s. Communism fundamentally is a classless, stateless society. It's possible they were a social reformist party or a socialist party, but to be a communist party in a very much stated society is, I don't even know what that would mean. You could only functionally pass like SOCDEM or like socialist transitionary policies. I don't know what you can't just destroy the state like as a party of the state. Maybe some people think that can't happen. I don't believe in that personally. I'll look into it, okay? I'll read a book.
They've got a follow-up question. So Ariel Fernandez, thanks for your super chat. They said, Vosh, what do you think Yugoslavia, or do you think Yugoslavia was socialist?
Yugoslavia, that's with Tito, right? I don't know why I looked at you. With Tito, right? Okay, so Tito was a dictator in, I think, I'm going to horribly embarrass, normally I have chat to correct me if I'm fucking up or something, but assuming that Tito was the leader of Yugoslavia, this would have been back when he defied Stalin, he was his own special little dictator. I've read some really interesting stuff on Yugoslavia's market socialism, because I'm a market socialist, and they had these like collectively owned enterprises that were actually really effective, for their time given the resources available to them. But there were some very critical problems, many of which stemmed from the incompatibilities between a hierarchical authoritarian political system and a functionally democratic economic system. Were they truly socialist? I mean, a lot of the workers did own a lot of the means of production. That's farther along than the USSR came for most of its history, so that's good. But is it like an example I would look to replicate? Am I like very proud of this historically? I don't think so, no.
Thanks so much. And Comdot, thanks for your super chat. They ask another one for Vosh, this is for both, and the next one's just for Vosh. But they say, all right, obviously there's no revolution tomorrow, but what are good ways of fighting for change that are actually efficacious or effective?
Please, I talked last.
I mean, the most important thing you can do is go out and vote, obviously. Not only that, but like get your friends to vote. It's also really important, like there's a lot of volunteer work to be done on the ground for a lot of these campaigns. If you were inspired by Bernie Sanders' performance in Iowa and New Hampshire, a lot of that came down to the amount of people that not only volunteered, but would literally travel from state to state, like working with a lot of these campaigns. The Bernie Sanders campaign actually had an app you could download on the phone to like get connected and whatnot to volunteer, which was really, really cool for them. But yeah, there's a lot of like places locally to get involved with politics if you like actually reach out to your political parties to find out. And I know that like volunteering for campaigns is definitely one of them. And then because of how incestuous politics is, for better or for worse, there are benefits to it. Once you start doing that type of work, it's easy to continue to do that type of work too. Like there's a lot of people on, like the Obama and Hillary campaigns that are going to work in politics for the rest of their life because of their involvement, with said campaigns. So yeah, I mean that would probably be the place I would start. Like actual like voting and working with campaigns would be a good place to start. Yeah.
I agree. Voting is not cringe. It's the what do you say? Like they always say, if voting was didn't do anything, or if voting did anything, they would make it illegal. I mean, they're trying to, with all the voter suppression that goes on, all the polling places they closed down in Texas, for example. The goal of revolutionaries should not be to say voting doesn't matter, God, fuck voting, whatever, and stay at home. The goal of the revolutionary should be to go out and vote and then go back home and say, God, voting doesn't matter, fuck voting. That's the goal. Apathy one day, but productivity the other. And I do agree about that grassroots sort of political organizing. It's very effective. I say, get rid of the apolitical people. Don't kill them. Make them political. Everyone should be invested in politics. Apolitical people are or what would you call it, lumpen proletariat? If you want to be real fancy with it, are the dead gray masses upon which the corporate elites are able to build their pyramids. Don't let them be apolitical. Get your friends interested. I don't care how apolitical they seem. Everyone benefits. Everyone wants a job. Well, everyone needs money at least. Everyone benefits from their involvement in the political process. So push them on that. Even if it's a little cringe. This matters, and it matters to them too. Also, vote and get folks to do mail-in voting. Please, God. Care more about your local politics. Local politics is how you get states to implement mail-in voting, and mail-in voting is how you get Zoomers to vote because they don't want to go outside because they're playing Smash Bros. I don't know. There's a lot that can be done, and a lot of it requires paying attention, and paying attention fucking hurts. Because to be politically involved, especially as a leftist, is a constant source of disappointment, but that is the price we pay, the burden we bear for trying to make the world a better place.
Thanks so much. And next up, appreciate your question from Turbo. They said, did Vosh state capitalism exacerbates the problems introduced by industrialization? Sounds like the opposite position he had when speaking to Molyneux.
I want to clarify this. I think that's excellent. Capitalism is, in my opinion, the economic system best situated to take advantage of the productive efforts brought about during the Industrial Revolution. However, it has been shown, at least through the Soviet Union, that even without the profit motive, you can still very rapidly industrialize. Exigent those points, the social and political consequences of the industrialization were a massive increase in the hierarchy between those who owned said facilities and those who worked there. And that is a hierarchy which produces a great deal of suffering, and that is a hierarchy which was put in place functionally by a capitalist economy. But I'm not one of those people who said capitalism never did anything good. It has absolutely had its role in history.
Thanks so much. And Al, thanks for your super chat. They asked for both. This is a neat one. What have been the biggest shifts of position for you these past years?
Would you like to?
So 2016, I was like a massive Bernie fan, and I think like seeing the more intricacies in the U.S. political system, I think my opinion has changed a lot on that. So I used to believe, for instance, like corporate money drove everything, that politics were like all like bullshit. But like I'm much more into the like local offices and local elections matter a lot. You can't just look at national polling. Political strategy is very important. You can't just poll something on Twitter and find out that should be like the rule of law in Congress, but that like paying attention to each and every district and who's vulnerable is like really important. That having like that there's like an interwoven like association between like politicians, between media, between establishment, people in Congress and current leaders is like all really important. I guess basically getting a greater appreciation for the entire game of politics is something that I've developed a lot over the past four years, I guess. That's been a pretty significant departure from how I viewed politics in 2016.
I haven't joined the alt-right the way that Destiny has, but there have been a fair few things. I think I've gotten a little bit less ideological. Which I think is generally a good thing, because I think you should, nobody is truly free of ideology, of course, but I think that generally you should be able to make arguments that could be convincing to people who don't share the same conclusions as you. And I think that and this is something that I've had to develop because I've only started streaming over the past year. It's all very well and good to be voraciously, populist socialist when you're speaking to populist socialists. But if you want to have any shot at convincing people who disagree with you, you have to approach things from a different perspective. So a lot of this has been a rhetorical change, or at least an ideological change that facilitates a rhetorical change. I've moved over on stuff like rent control as well. I think I have a little bit more appreciation for the complexities of the market economy that we live in today. Doesn't mean I like it anymore. It just means that it's a little more complicated than I initially took to believe, and that change will have to be not more incremental, but at the very least more nuanced than I initially expected. The Fed does indeed go burr, with the money machines. And it's a nightmarishly complicated system. Lefties are underrepresented in the field of economics. I think that needs to change. At least in contemporary economics, we've had a tremendous amount of influence historically.
Thanks so much. We're going to get through just a few more questions, folks, and then it's already been well over 2 hours, so we do want to let these guys get some rest. We really appreciate all of you being here, all your questions. We might not get to all of them, but we'll sure try to get through as many as we can. Wawa Crates, thanks for your super chat, who asked, will Trump formally debate the primary candidate? Does it even make sense for him to do so when he could just bash the person safely from Trump's own rallies or Twitter?
I think he will. I think it would look too bad for him to avoid it the entire time. He can't avoid a call out like that.
He's a fucking egomaniac. There's no way he could resist the applause, right? He said he wants to go up against Biden. I know we maybe disagree on this. I think that Biden is a senile, codger, and I do think that Trump would have a pretty easy time milking applause off of him. Whether or not that means he's a better candidate, I'm not to that. Just in terms of like how he could like dunk on Biden in the debates, I think if nothing else, Trump would be very confident. I think there will be debates, and I must say, sphincter tighteningly concerned as to how public perception of those debates will pan out.
Thank you very much. Queetery, thanks for your super chat. They said, Vosh, could you explain your position on political violence?
Yeah, a lot of people don't know what political violence really means. Political violence is just the orchestration of violence or the deprivation of somebody's well-being through or for political means. Police arresting you for anything is political violence, even if you murdered some folk. What, you think the law against murder just sprung up out of Jerusalem? No. I guess it's kind of but it's also a political thing. Political violence is a shade, a very broad shade of grays. And the degree to which you support it varies tremendously depending on which political camp you're in. I imagine I support it more than Destiny would, just by way of me being a populist, revolutionary-leaning guy. But we both support some basic levels of it, the existence of prisons, for example. But more broadly, if you take a look, for example, like pre-abolition, like John Brown, do you really think it would be immoral if a bunch of slaves got together, hoarded up their farm equipment, and like bludgeoned their slave master over the head before making a run for it? That's political violence right there. It's not non-ideological. They're not just like making this jump to freedom completely through, the abstract reasoning. It's political violence. And I think anyone who says they're concretely opposed to political violence believes that it exclusively means like firebombing nurseries or abortion clinics or some really out there stuff like that I obviously wouldn't support.
Thanks so much. Last one. Jack Attack LP, thanks for your super chat. They asked, thoughts on the Electoral College? I know that you two disagree on this. Destiny, I think, still likes it, while Vosh thinks it's a tool by which Republican states harm us.
I don't want to do a whole debate on Electoral College. We'll both give our normal spiels for it. I think it's okay to slightly overrepresent smaller states because I think it's okay to keep states represent or invested in like the ongoings of the union. I don't think that California in and of itself should be able to rule the entire country or like the California, Texas, Florida, like the larger states with the larger share of electoral votes. I do think that votes should be given up proportionally. Like that's one change I would make, that just because you get 51% of the vote in a state, everybody should do like Maine and Nebraska where you give it out proportionally based on the vote. So at least like people would campaign in states like maybe places in California or whatever where it's worth getting some more people to vote for you. And then maybe I would change how you allot some of the electoral votes, so maybe it's a little bit more equal. Like I think like isn't somebody in Wyoming's vote like 8 times as much as somebody in California?
I think it's 4.2.
Is it 4.2? Okay, yeah, I don't know.
That's
Maybe I would
still
change,
pretty
maybe I would
bad.
change a little bit of that, or a little bit. Maybe make it two or 3 point whatever to 1. But yeah, overall, I'm okay with the idea of overrepresenting some smaller states just so that they're not completely and totally ignored. I know that some people would say they're ignored now, but I would say, well, they're ignored now because it's a winner-take-all situation. So there's no point in campaigning in a lot of these states at all. But that's my general stand for the Electoral College.
Thank you.
I'm not really sold on the idea that the Electoral College as it is now really convinces politicians to give more of a shit about folks in more rural states. I suppose it's difficult to tell exactly. I know that they'll just campaign, for example, in battleground states. Nobody's going to go over to like Vermont or Wyoming.
Well, that's because it's not awarded proportionally, right?
Right. But that's what I'm saying, though. It's difficult to tell how much of this is because of the Electoral College and how much of it is because of each state's vote distribution. There's currently some plan. Have you seen the CGP Gray video on this? Because I didn't know about it. There's some plan apparently where a bunch of states are signing a compact together where once signed and once more than 50% of states' total vote percentages agree to it, they would assign all of their delegates to whoever wins the popular vote in a national election. So once a number of states equal to 51% or more of the population have signed in on this, they'll just wait for the national vote tally, and whoever gets it, they'll just all award their, which is completely subverting the point of the Electoral College, but maybe is better because the way that the way the delegates are disproportionately represented now is like really, really weird, and it creates a lot of perverse incentives where you can completely ignore some states and then spend a bunch of time on others, but it also means that millions of people and their votes are left ignored in like states like California or Texas, where there are a lot of respectively conservative or liberal people. I don't know. The system needs to change, I guess. It could move in a lot of directions.
Thanks so much. And with that, I want to say thanks so much, folks, for being with us. I have put both of our guest links in the description box, so go ahead, check them out if you enjoyed listening to them today. I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much, guys. It's been a true pleasure. And as we have mentioned, folks, thanks for your super chats, which 100% will be going to charity to help try to stem the negative effects of coronavirus. And so a huge thanks to Stephen and Vosh for helping make this kind of charity drive possible today. It's been a great discussion, gentlemen.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I had a phenomenal time. Thank you so much.
With that, keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. Take care, folks, and have a great rest of your day.